My name is Vanessa. I am 42 years old, and somehow I am still processing the sheer audacity of the people I called family. As the founder of a successful financial risk management firm in Atlanta, I built an empire to give my husband and daughter the best life possible. But to them, I was never a wife or a mother. I was just an ATM machine. Last week, standing at the VIP check-in desk at the airport, my 12-year-old daughter snatched my passport, ripped my first-class ticket in half, and ordered me to stay home to watch her dog. My husband just laughed and told me to wire him casino money. I simply picked up my passport and smiled. That night, I canceled their $40,000 luxury suite in Monaco, drained the joint accounts, and completely emptied our $3 million mansion. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who underestimated your worth. The international terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport was bustling with the usual morning rush of executives and vacationers. I stood at the exclusive Delta One check-in lounge, feeling the familiar exhaustion of a woman who carried the financial weight of an entire household on her shoulders. I was wearing a simple tailored suit, constantly checking my phone to finalize a corporate merger for a client. Next to me stood my husband, Derek. He was 45 years old, wearing a custom-tailored linen suit and a pair of sunglasses indoors, looking every bit the successful sports agent he desperately pretended to be. In reality, his agency had been secretly bleeding money for years, and my firm was the only thing keeping his business afloat. And then, there was our 12-year-old daughter Chloe rolling her Louis Vuitton carry-on bag with an expression of profound boredom. We were supposed to be flying to Monaco for a 2-week family vacation. I had paid for everything. The first-class tickets, the luxury suite at the Hôtel de Paris, the private car transfers. I had worked 80-hour weeks for 6 months straight, just to clear my schedule for this trip, hoping to finally reconnect with my husband and daughter. But as the elegant ticketing agent printed our boarding passes and placed them on the polished marble counter, the illusion of our perfect family shattered. Chloe suddenly stopped texting on her phone and glared at the boarding passes. She looked up at me with a scowl that she had learned directly from her father. "Who is watching Bentley while we are gone?" she demanded, her voice loud enough to make the other wealthy passengers turn their heads. Bentley was a $5,000 golden doodle that Derek had bought her for Christmas without consulting me. It was a classic Derek move. He bought the expensive gift to be the fun dad, but left the actual responsibility of feeding, walking, and training the dog entirely to me. I kept my voice calm and professional. "I told you this morning, Chloe. I hired a professional pet sitter to stay at the house. Bentley will be perfectly fine." Chloe slammed her hands on the marble counter. "No, I do not want some stranger in our house. Bentley gets anxious. You need to stay home and watch him." I let out a tired sigh, rubbing my temples. "Chloe, do not be ridiculous. We are going to Monaco. The boarding passes are right here. I am not canceling a luxury vacation to babysit a dog." Before I could even reach for my ticket, Chloe lunged forward. She snatched my passport and my freshly printed first-class ticket right off the counter. In one swift, vicious motion, she ripped my boarding pass cleanly in half and let the pieces flutter to the floor. "You are not going to Monaco!" Chloe snapped, her tone dripping with venom and entitlement. "You are staying home to take care of my dog. Dad says you just stare at spreadsheets all day anyway. He said he needs a real vacation, not a business trip with his ATM machine." The air in the VIP lounge seemed to evaporate. The ticketing agent froze, her eyes wide with shock. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over our section of the counter. I stood there staring at the torn pieces of thick cardstock resting on the floor. The words echoed in my head. "A TM machine." I slowly turned my head to look at Derek. I expected him to be horrified. I expected him to grab our daughter by the arm, demand an apology, and correct her blatant disrespect. I expected him to be a father. Instead, Derek chuckled. He actually laughed. He adjusted his expensive sunglasses, leaned against the counter, and gave the ticketing agent a charming, unapologetic smile. You know how it is, he said smoothly, playing the role of the cool, indulgent father. The kid loves her dog. She gets severe separation anxiety. What can you do? Then Derek turned to me. There was no warmth in his eyes, only a calculating emptiness. He patted my shoulder like I was an employee who had just been dismissed for the day. Look, V, he said, using that patronizing tone he always used when he wanted something. Maybe it is for the best. You have been super stressed anyway, and you would probably just sit in the hotel room working while we are out enjoying the yacht parties. Why do you not just take an Uber home, hang out with the dog, and relax? Oh, and before you head back, wire an extra 20,000 into my checking account. The tables at Monte Carlo are not cheap, and I need to entertain some potential clients. He did not offer to stay. He did not reprimand his daughter. He just saw an opportunity to get rid of me while keeping my money. In that exact moment, a profound shift happened inside my brain. For 12 years, I had compromised. I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I had paid off his secret business debts to protect our image in the Atlanta high society scene. I had tolerated his sister draining my accounts, and I had excused his emotional distance. I thought I was being a strong, supportive wife, but as I looked at the smug expression on my 12-year-old daughter's face and the arrogant smirk on my husband's lips, the fog of loyalty completely lifted. I am a financial risk manager. My entire career is built on identifying toxic assets, calculating the absolute limit of acceptable loss, and ruthlessly liquidating bad investments before they can destroy the portfolio. Standing in Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, I realized I was looking at the two worst investments of my entire life. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not cause a scene for the wealthy onlookers to gossip about. Crying was for victims, and I was done being a victim. I slowly bent down and picked up my passport from the floor. I left the torn boarding pass exactly where it had fallen. I stood back up, smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored suit jacket, and looked Derek dead in the eye. You know what, Derek? You are absolutely right. Derek blinked slightly, taken aback by my calm demeanor. He had been bracing for an argument, ready to gaslight me into submission. My immediate agreement caught him off guard. Yeah, he stammered slightly. Yeah, I mean, it just makes sense. You need the rest. I need a lot of things, I replied, my voice smooth and devoid of any emotion. I smiled warmly at Chloe, a smile that did not reach my eyes. Have a fantastic time in Monaco, Chloe. Make sure you buy something nice. Chloe crossed her arms, looking triumphant. Obviously. I turned back to Derek. Have a fantastic trip. Good luck at the casino. Without another word, I turned my back on my husband and my daughter. I did not look over my shoulder as they gathered their designer luggage and confidently strolled toward the security checkpoint, fully believing they had won. They thought they had successfully bullied the ATM machine into staying home with the dog. They thought they were about to board a luxurious flight to Europe on my dime. They were wrong. I walked directly to the empty ticketing counter at the far end of the lounge. The agent there looked up, ready to assist. I pulled out my heavy metal corporate black card and placed it on the counter. I did not call an Uber to go home. I had work to do. The complete financial demolition of Derek's life was going to require precision, speed, and absolute ruthlessness. The tearing of that plane ticket was not an insult. It was a liberation. It was the exact breach of contract I needed to finally shut down their funding forever. And by the time my husband and daughter reached their departure gate, their entire world would be permanently canceled. I looked at the ticketing agent and smiled. I need to make some immediate adjustments to a travel itinerary, I said clearly. And then I need to book a one-way ticket to Chicago. I have an urgent meeting with my private wealth management lawyer. The ticketing agent blinked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She looked at my corporate black card, then back up at my face, trying to mask her bewilderment. Ma'am, she started carefully, you want to permanently cancel the return flights for the other two passengers as well. They are currently heading to the security checkpoint. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my voice impeccably calm. Yes. Cancel the Delta One return tickets for my husband and daughter. Process the refund directly to the original form of payment, which is the corporate account attached to the card I just handed you. Leave their outbound tickets to Nice alone, but remove all VIP upgrades. Let them fly coach if they still want to go. The agent swallowed hard and began typing furiously. While she processed the transaction, I stepped a few feet away and dialed the international concierge desk for the Hôtel de Paris in Monte Carlo. It was early afternoon in Monaco, and the sophisticated voice of a French concierge answered the line. I verified my identity, using my corporate security PIN, and gave him my direct instructions. I am calling to completely cancel the reservation for the Diamond Suite booked under my husband's name, I said. The concierge hesitated, his tone shifting to one of polite concern. Madam, I must remind you of our strict cancellation policy. Because you are calling within 48 hours of arrival, there will be a substantial penalty fee. I was fully aware of their policies. I did not care about the penalty fees. I told him to terminate the reservation immediately and to refund the remaining $35,000 directly to my private offshore account, deliberately bypassing the joint checking account Derek had access to. Within 4 minutes, the financial guillotine had dropped. My husband and daughter were officially stranded. They had no luxury suite waiting for them in Europe. They had no return flights. I walked back to the Delta counter. The agent handed me a receipt for the refunds along with my boarding pass for a direct flight to Chicago O'Hare. She offered a sympathetic smile, perhaps sensing the immense gravity of the power dynamic I had just flipped. I took the pass, thanked her graciously, and walked toward the domestic security gates. I did not look back to see if Derek or Chloe were watching. They were no longer my concern. The flight to Chicago took roughly 2 hours, which gave me exactly 120 minutes to initiate the absolute dismantling of my marriage. I ordered a glass of sparkling water, opened my laptop on the tray table, and connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi. For years, I had deliberately ignored the red flags regarding Derek and his failing sports agency. I had convinced myself that my financial support was a temporary necessity, a way to maintain our standing in the affluent circles of Atlanta. But as I accessed my secure banking portals at 30,000 feet, the truth was undeniable. I pulled up the joint accounts first. I transferred every single dollar of our shared liquid assets into a private trust that only I controlled. Next, I logged into the corporate dashboard of my financial risk management firm. I systematically froze all 3 of the secondary credit cards Derek had been using to fund his lavish lifestyle. I disabled his access to my airline miles, my hotel reward points, and the corporate expense accounts he had been draining to take his friends to expensive steakhouses. By the time the plane began its descent into Chicago, Derek possessed nothing but the cash in his wallet and a handful of maxed-out personal credit cards tied to his failing business. A black car was waiting for me at O'Hare. It took me directly to a high-rise building in the financial district where my private wealth management lawyer, a ruthless and brilliant man named Richard, had cleared his afternoon schedule for me. I walked into his mahogany-paneled office, placed my briefcase on his desk, and laid out the situation. I need to execute the emergency protocols on all my LLCs, I told him, not bothering with pleasantries. Derek has pushed too far. I want my assets entirely firewalled by the close of business today. Richard did not ask questions about my marriage. He simply opened his files and went to work. Over the next 3 hours, we legally severed Derek from any potential claim to my corporate earnings. But the most crucial move was regarding our primary residence. The sprawling $3 million mansion in Atlanta was not in Derek's name. I had purchased it through a subsidiary holding company 3 years ago when his credit score tanked due to his agency's secret debts. I was the sole legal owner. While Richard finalized the paperwork, I made one final phone call. I dialed the direct line of my executive assistant back in Atlanta. She was a fiercely loyal woman who knew better than to question my orders. I need you to contact the premium relocation service we use for corporate clients, I instructed her. Have them send their largest team to my house immediately. I want every single piece of furniture, every rug, every painting, and every electronic device packed up and moved to a secure, climate-controlled storage facility. They have 6 hours to leave the house completely bare. Oh, and tell them to leave the folding chair from the garage in the center of the living room. My assistant paused for only a fraction of a second before replying. Considered it done, Vanessa. With the trap fully set, I checked into a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago, ordered room service, and waited for the inevitable explosion. I did not have to wait long to see the first domino fall. Through the airline application on my phone, I received a notification that Derek and Chloe had attempted to board their flight to Nice. The time jump from my afternoon in Chicago to their midnight humiliation in Atlanta played out exactly as I had calculated. At the international departure gate, Derek had confidently strutted up to the podium, handing over his passport and demanding his usual first-class priority boarding. The gate agent scanned his document, frowned, and informed him that his ticket had been downgraded to an economy middle seat, and his return flight did not exist. Enraged, Derek had undoubtedly thrown a tantrum, demanding to buy a new first-class ticket on the spot. He would have pulled out his prestigious black credit card with a smug look, expecting the problem to disappear with a quick swipe. Instead, the machine blinked red, declined. He would have tried a second card, declined, a third, declined. The humiliation must have been absolute. Standing in front of the other wealthy passengers from Atlanta society, the fake millionaire was suddenly exposed as a man who could not even afford a bottle of water at the airport kiosk. Chloe, stripped of her designer vacation and her first-class status, would have thrown a massive fit, blaming him for the embarrassment, rejected from the flight. Stripped of their accommodations and utterly out of funds, they were forced to drag their heavy luggage all the way back through the airport to the rideshare pickup zone. By midnight, the heavy Georgia humidity was suffocating. Derek and Chloe sat in the back of a cheap, cramped Uber, sweating and fuming as they drove back to the affluent neighborhood they no longer had any right to claim. Derek's phone battery was likely dead from furiously trying to call my number, which I had already blocked. He was probably rehearsing the exact words he was going to use to scream at me, ready to demand that I fix his credit, apologize to his daughter, and grovel for his forgiveness. He was preparing to assert his dominance as the head of the household. The Uber pulled up to the grand wrought iron gates of our property. Derek punched in the security code, and the gates swung open to reveal the dark, imposing silhouette of the mansion. He grabbed his bag, stormed up the front steps, and aggressively shoved his key into the lock. He kicked the heavy oak door open, the sound echoing loudly in the quiet, upscale neighborhood. "Vanessa, get down here right now!" Derek roared, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. He stepped into the grand foyer, dropping his suitcase onto the hardwood floor, fully expecting me to emerge from the kitchen, looking guilty and submissive. Instead, the words died in his throat. He froze in the doorway, the midnight breeze sweeping past him into the house. Chloe bumped into his back, complaining about the heat, before she too stopped dead in her tracks. The grand crystal chandelier was still hanging from the ceiling, casting a cold, brilliant light across the massive space. But that was the only thing left. The $3.2 million mansion was completely, horribly empty. The custom Italian leather sofas I had purchased were gone. The Persian rugs had been rolled up and removed. The expensive modern art pieces that Derek loved to show off on his social media accounts had been stripped from the walls, leaving only bare white paint and faint shadows where they used to hang. Even the sheer curtains had been taken down. The acoustic echo of his own heavy breathing bounced off the barren walls. In the exact center of the cavernous, empty living room sat a single cheap metal folding chair. Beside the chair, tied to a sturdy hook on the baseboard, was the $5,000 Golden Doodle Bentley. The dog whimpered softly, sitting next to a massive bag of dry kibble and a water bowl. Resting perfectly centered on the seat of the metal folding chair was a thick, heavy manila folder. Derek stood paralyzed in the doorway of a house he realized he never truly owned, staring at the physical manifestation of his own irrelevance. The ATM machine had not just closed for business. The entire bank had relocated. Derek dropped his designer suitcase. The heavy thud echoed violently through the barren foyer, bouncing off the walls of the grand entryway. He walked slowly into the massive living room, his footsteps sounding unnaturally loud against the naked Brazilian cherry hardwood floors. He spun around in circles, his mouth opening and closing as his brain struggled to process the total absence of his luxurious lifestyle. The reality of the emptiness was staggering. There was no 75-inch flat-screen television mounted on the custom stone fireplace. The expensive wet bar, which he loved to stand behind while bragging to his friends about his supposed business deals, had been completely stripped of its top-shelf bourbon and crystal decanters. Even the heavy custom-made silk drapes had been unhooked from the massive windows, exposing the entire room to the stark, unforgiving moonlight shining in from the street. Chloe dropped her Louis Vuitton bag and let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. "Dad, where is my stuff? Where is my room?" She sprinted up the grand sweeping staircase, her heavy footsteps echoing through the hollow house. Seconds later, her panicked voice echoed down from the second-floor landing. "It is gone. My clothes, my vanity, my electronics, my gaming setup, everything is gone. There is not even a mattress." Derek did not answer her. He could not. His eyes were locked on the exact center of the living room. Under the harsh glare of the imported crystal chandelier, a single cheap metal folding chair sat alone on the floor. It was the kind of rusted chair you would find at a community center bingo night. Tied to the back leg of that rusted chair was Bentley. The $5,000 golden doodle wagged his tail nervously, letting out a soft whimper. He was sitting next to a 40-pound bag of dry dog kibble and a plastic water bowl. Resting squarely on the cold metal seat of the folding chair was a thick, heavy manila folder. Derek marched over to the chair, his face contorted in absolute unhinged fury. He kicked the heavy bag of dog food out of the way, making the dog yelp and scramble back. He snatched the folder off the chair, but he did not open it. His pride was too wounded, his ego too bruised to look at whatever I had left for him. Instead, he pulled out his phone, his hands shaking violently with rage, and aggressively dialed my number. I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window of my luxury penthouse suite in downtown Chicago, watching the vibrant city lights reflect off the dark waters of the Chicago River. I wore a plush hotel robe, holding a glass of chilled, sparkling water in one hand and my phone in the other. When his name flashed across the screen demanding my immediate attention, I simply watched it ring. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. I wanted his desperation to marinate in the quiet emptiness of that massive house. On the 5th ring, just before it went to voicemail, I pressed answer and brought the phone to my ear. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Derek roared into the speaker. His voice was so loud and full of vitriol that I had to hold the phone an inch away from my ear. "I just walked into an empty house, Vanessa. You took everything. My car is not in the garage. My watches are gone. My clothes are gone. Who do you think you are? You do not just clear out a man's castle in the middle of the night because of a disagreement at the airport." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. "It is not your castle, Derek. You were merely a guest, and your stay has been permanently terminated. Do not play these corporate boardroom games with me," he screamed, his voice cracking with panic and deeply wounded pride. "I am your husband. I am the man of this house. We are a prominent Black family in Atlanta society, Vanessa. People look up to us. You are supposed to be a strong Black woman who respects the head of her household, not some spiteful, unhinged lunatic throwing a tantrum because her daughter was a little bratty. You bring my furniture back right now, or I swear to God I will call the police and report every single item stolen." I let out a soft, cold, calculating laugh. It was a sound he had never heard from me before, a sound devoid of any wife-like submission or maternal warmth. "I highly suggest you do not call the police, Derek, because they will ask for proof of ownership, and you do not possess any." "What are you talking about?" He snapped, his breathing heavy into the microphone. "I bought that house through my limited liability company 3 years ago." I explained smoothly, enunciating every single word so it would cut straight to his ego. "I paid the mortgage. I bought the Italian leather sofas you flexed on Instagram to your pathetic followers. I leased the Range Rover under my corporate account. I paid for the designer suits you wear to pretend you are a successful sports agent. Respect is earned, Derek. You are the head of the household of an empty room. Enjoy the floor." There was a sharp gasp on the other end of the line. For the first time in our 12-year marriage, Derek was entirely speechless. The reality of his utter financial dependence on me was finally crashing down on him. The illusion of his dominance was shattered. "Mom, is that Mom on the phone?" Chloe yelled in the background. Her voice was shrill, demanding and utterly clueless to the severity of the situation. "Tell her to bring my stuff back right now. I have a sleepover this weekend. She cannot do this to me. Make her fix it, Dad. Tell your daughter, I said, raising my voice just enough so Chloe could hear me clearly through the phone speaker, that the dog needs to be walked. Since she decided to violently tear up my plane ticket and stay home to take care of him, she can start by taking him out to the backyard. And she can sleep on the hardwood floor next to him tonight. You are a monster, Derek hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You are actually a cold-blooded monster. You think this is funny. You think you can just blindside me with a divorce, strip my house bare, and take everything I have worked for. Who said anything about a divorce? I asked innocently. He scoffed loudly. Oh, do not play dumb with me, Vanessa. I see the folder sitting on the chair. I know exactly what this is. You left the divorce papers sitting right here for me to find like some dramatic movie villain. You think you are so smart. I walked over to the mahogany desk in my hotel room and sat down, opening my laptop. I am not a movie villain, Derek. I am a financial risk manager. And that is not a divorce petition. I highly suggest you open that folder and read the first page before you say another word to me. I heard the sound of the thick paper envelope tearing open. I heard the frantic rustling of heavy printed documents. Then I heard the silence. It was a thick, suffocating, terrifying silence that lasted for a full 60 seconds. I could practically hear his heart pounding through the cellular connection. What is this? Derek finally whispered. The booming confidence of the supposed head of the household was completely gone. His voice was hollow, trembling with a sudden icy terror. That, Derek, is your reality check, I told him. It is a 5-year forensic accounting audit of your sports agency. Every single ledger, every single hidden bank account, every single illegal loan you took out without my knowledge. He was hyperventilating now. The pages ruffled frantically as he flipped through the massive audit. Vanessa, where did you get this? How did you access my private servers? You hacked my business accounts. This is illegal. I ignored his pathetic accusations. Turn to page 42, I instructed him coldly. Read the highlighted section. I listened as he fumbled with the thick stack of papers. He was breathing heavily, almost choking on his own panic. You thought you were so clever. I continued, my voice steady, rhythmic, and unforgiving. You thought because I was busy working 80 hours a week to fund your lavish lifestyle, I was not paying attention to where the money was actually going. You claimed your agency was just going through a rough patch. You claimed your athletes were just late on paying their commission fees. But you have not signed a new athlete in 3 years, Derek. You have been living off fraudulent business loans secured against my company's assets. You forged my signature on corporate guarantees. Vanessa, please, he begged, his tone entirely shifting from arrogant rage to desperate, pathetic pleading. We can talk about this. We can fix this together as a family. You do not understand the pressure I was under to keep up appearances in our community. I had to look successful so we would be respected. I understand perfectly, I replied. Turn to page 42, Derek. He stopped shuffling the papers. I heard him swallow hard. Read it, I commanded. It is the offshore account, he whispered, his voice cracking, sounding like a terrified child. Speak up, I said. It is the offshore account in the Cayman Islands, he repeated louder, his voice breaking entirely. Yes, I said. The account you used to hide massive amounts of undeclared income from the Internal Revenue Service. The account you linked directly to my corporate routing numbers so that if you ever got caught by the federal government, I would go down as your financial guarantor. You were going to let me take the fall for your financial crimes. I did not mean to involve you, he cried out. I swear, I was going to pay it all back. I just needed one big score, one big client to clear all the debts. You have to believe me, I am your husband. I do not have to believe anything I said, feeling a massive surge of absolute power. That folder contains everything you have been hiding. The unpaid federal taxes, the defaulted loans, the secret credit cards you opened in my name. I know exactly how much you owe, and I know exactly who you owe it to. What do you want from me? He pleaded, his spirit entirely broken. Just tell me what you want. I will sign whatever you want me to sign. I will send Chloe to stay with my mother tomorrow morning. Just please, Vanessa, do not take this to the authorities. They will lock me up. My life will be over. I leaned back in my leather chair and looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the hotel window. What I want is for you to understand your exact position in this game. You are completely exposed. You have no money, no assets, and no leverage. As of tomorrow morning, your agency is bankrupt. As of right now, you are sleeping on an empty floor. Before he could utter another desperate apology, I pressed the red button and ended the call. I tossed the phone onto the desk. The first strike had been executed flawlessly. Derek was officially paralyzed by his own secrets, but I knew the peace would not last. Derek was a coward, and cowards always run to their enablers when they are cornered. He would not face me like a man. He would send the one person who had spent her entire life leeching off my success and defending his failures. Tomorrow morning, his sister Keisha was going to find out that she was next on the chopping block. The sun rose over the Atlanta skyline, casting a sharp golden glare across the floor to ceiling windows of my corporate firm. I arrived at the office promptly at 7 in the morning. I was dressed in a pristine charcoal blazer, holding a black coffee and operating on pure, unadulterated adrenaline. The satisfaction of the previous night had not faded. Instead, it had crystallized into a cold, hyper-focused energy. I sat behind my mahogany desk reviewing the final asset freeze confirmations sent over by my legal team in Chicago. Derek was completely locked out. Now it was time to sever the remaining parasites. At exactly 8:45, the secure glass doors of my reception area violently swung open. The sharp, aggressive clacking of designer heels echoed across the polished marble floor, followed by the frantic voice of the lobby security guard. I did not even look up from my laptop. I knew exactly who it was. Keisha, my 38-year-old sister-in-law, marched past my bewildered executive assistant and stormed directly into my office. Close behind her was Estelle, Derek's mother. Estelle was a woman who carried herself with the haughty entitlement of a Southern matriarch, demanding respect from everyone while quietly living off the financial grace of her daughter-in-law. Keisha was dressed head to toe in Gucci, carrying a Birkin bag that I had technically paid for. It was an incredibly bold fashion choice for a woman whose supposed independent boutique had not turned a single dollar of actual profit in 5 years. Keisha slammed her manicured hands down on my desk, her face twisted in a mask of performative theatrical outrage. She wanted my entire staff to hear her. "You have lost your damn mind, Vanessa." Keisha shouted, her voice echoing through the open glass doors of my office. "You left my brother and my niece in an empty house. You shut off his credit cards. You are tearing a black family apart over a stupid joke at an airport. Who do you think you are?" I calmly closed my laptop. I looked at Keisha, then at Estelle, who was clutching her pearl necklace and shaking her head in exaggerated disappointment. "Good morning to you too, Keisha," I said smoothly. "Estelle, please have a seat." "I am not sitting down in the office of a woman who treats her husband like a stray dog," Estelle snapped. Her voice was dripping with that toxic generational guilt trip she had used to manipulate people her entire life. "A strong black woman holds her family together, Vanessa. She does not emasculate her husband in public. Derek is a prominent man in this city. He has a reputation to uphold. You need to call your bank, restore his credit limits immediately, and bring that furniture back to my son's house before people start talking." "People are already talking, Estelle," I replied gently, leaning back in my leather chair. "But they are not talking about me." Keisha stepped forward, pointing a finger directly at my face. "You always do this. You always thought you were better than us just because you went to Spelman and got some fancy corporate degree. You look down on my brother because his business hit a rough patch. You think having money makes you a god, but you are just a bitter, controlling woman who cannot handle the fact that Derek is the real head of the family." I let her finish. I let her exhaust her rehearsed speech. I wanted her to feel incredibly confident, incredibly righteous, right before I pulled the rug out from under her entire existence. I pressed a button under my desk. The heavy electronic blinds on the glass walls of my office slowly lowered, plunging the room into a cool, private shade. My assistant quietly stepped out and pulled the double doors shut, locking them from the outside. Keisha and Estelle glanced around, a brief flash of uncertainty crossing their faces as the room darkened. Then I picked up a small remote control and pressed another button. The high-definition projector mounted on the ceiling whirred to life. A massive 10-foot wide spreadsheet illuminated the blank white wall behind me. "Since you are so concerned about family unity and financial stability, Keisha," I said, standing up and walking over to the projected image, "let us talk about your boutique fashion business." Keisha swallowed hard. Her aggressive posture faltered slightly. "What does my business have to do with you throwing my brother out on the street?" "It has everything to do with it," I replied, picking up a laser pointer. "2 years ago, you came to me crying. You said you needed an influx of capital to launch your summer line. You gave me a passionate speech about supporting Black-owned businesses and keeping wealth inside our community, because I wanted to support my sister-in-law. I gave you a corporate expense card with a $15,000 monthly limit under the strict condition that it was used exclusively for inventory and commercial rent." Keisha crossed her arms defensively. "And I used it for my business. I have the receipts, Vanessa. You cannot audit me just because you are mad at Derek." I smiled. "I already audited you, Keisha. Last night." I clicked the remote. The screen shifted from a general ledger to a highly detailed list of transaction records. I pointed the red laser at a recurring charge highlighted in bright yellow. "Let us look closely at these so-called business expenses," I instructed, my voice echoing coldly in the enclosed room. "Every month on the first day of the month, your corporate card is charged exactly $4,800 by a property management company in Buckhead. You categorize this in my accounting software as a warehouse storage fee for your excess inventory." Keisha's face completely drained of color. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. Estelle frowned, squinting at the screen. "What is she talking about?" Keisha, the older woman, asked, sensing the sudden shift in the room. I clicked the remote again. A copy of a residential lease agreement appeared on the wall. The signature at the bottom was Keisha's, but the listed occupant was someone else entirely. "It is not a warehouse, Estelle," I explained, turning to face my mother-in-law. "Keisha has not been storing clothes. For the last 24 months, Keisha has been using my money to pay the rent on a luxury penthouse condo in the most expensive neighborhood in Atlanta." Estelle looked confused. "Keisha, why are you renting an apartment? You have a house." "She is not renting it for herself," I said, delivering the fatal blow. I clicked the remote one final time. A photograph flashed onto the screen. It was an image pulled from a public Instagram profile. It showed a beautiful 24-year-old fitness model posing on the balcony of that exact Buckhead condo. In the reflection of the sliding glass door behind the girl, clear as day, was Derek. He was holding his phone, taking the picture. Estelle gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She stumbled backward, bumping into one of the leather guest chairs. Keisha began to physically tremble. The designer handbag slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor. "Vanessa, wait," she stammered, her tough exterior completely shattering. "I can explain. It is not what it looks like." "It is exactly what it looks like." I fired back, my voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. "You stood in my lobby and screamed about me tearing a family apart. Meanwhile, you have been laundering my money to finance your brother's affair. You forged expense reports. You lied to my accounting department. You facilitated his cheating using the very credit card I gave you out of the kindness of my heart." Keisha took a step toward me, tears suddenly brimming in her eyes. "Please, Vanessa," Derek begged me. "He said he was going to lose her if he could not secure that apartment. He said he would pay me back the rent money from his agency's profits, but the profits never came. I was just trying to help my brother. I did not want him to be miserable." I stared at her with absolute disgust. "You thought I was funding your boutique, but really I was paying to house the woman sleeping with my husband. You actively conspired to humiliate me." Estelle collapsed into the chair, clutching her chest. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, the reality of her son's depravity finally breaking through her stubborn denial. "Keisha, how could you do this? How could you lie to us?" "Do not act so shocked, Estelle," I snapped, turning my wrath onto her. "You raised a man who feels entitled to everything and responsible for nothing. You taught him that women exist merely to serve his ego and clean up his messes. Keisha is just following the exact family dynamic you created. Well, the dynamic ends today." I walked back to my desk and picked up a heavy, legal-sized envelope. I walked over to Keisha and slapped it hard against her chest. She reflexively grabbed it, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold it. "What is this?" she sobbed, mascara starting to run down her cheeks. "That is a draft of a federal lawsuit," I told her evenly. "By submitting false expense reports to my limited liability company across state lines, you have committed corporate wire fraud. You stole over $115,000 from me over the course of 2 years." Keisha let out a pathetic wail, dropping to her knees right there on my office carpet. "No. Please, Vanessa, I do not have that kind of money. I will lose everything. They will send me to prison. I have a daughter. Please do not do this to me. We are family. Black women are supposed to protect each other." "You stopped being my family the moment you signed that lease," I whispered, leaning down so I was eye level with her. "I am giving you exactly 24 hours to pack your bags and move out of the property you currently own, because my lawyers are putting a lien on it by tomorrow morning. If you try to hide any assets, or if you even think about warning Derek about the IRS audit I initiated last night, I will send this file straight to the FBI field office here in Atlanta." I stood back up and walked over to the door. I unlocked it and pulled it open, gesturing to the hallway. "Now get out of my office," I commanded. "Both of you, take your Gucci bag and your fake outrage and leave." Estelle practically dragged Keisha off the floor. The two women who had stormed in like conquering queens just 15 minutes prior, now shuffled out of my office like terrified refugees. Keisha was openly sobbing, clutching the lawsuit to her chest, while Estelle kept her head bowed in absolute shame. I watched them walk toward the elevators. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I returned to my desk, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and checked my phone. Right on schedule, a notification popped up on my screen. Derek was live on social media. He was sitting in the empty living room, tears streaming down his face, holding a phone out to record himself. The true manipulation was about to begin. The true manipulation was about to begin. I sat back in my leather chair, placed my coffee mug on the desk, and turned up the volume on my phone. Derek was broadcasting live on Instagram and Facebook simultaneously. He had purposefully positioned his phone on the floor so the camera captured the vast, echoing emptiness of our grand living room. He was sitting cross-legged on the bare hardwood next to that cheap metal folding chair, pulling Bentley the Golden Doodle into his lap to maximize the visual sympathy factor. He was dressed in a wrinkled, faded t-shirt, his eyes red and puffy-looking, disheveled and completely devastated. It was an Oscar-worthy performance designed specifically to assassinate my character. "My name is Derek," he started, his voice cracking with heavily rehearsed emotion. "And I am speaking to you today as a broken man. A broken father. Last night, my wife, a woman I have loved and supported through thick and thin for 12 years, completely abandoned her family. She waited until my daughter and I were standing at the airport, heading to what was supposed to be a bonding family vacation, and she canceled our tickets. She stranded us. And while we were scrambling to find our way home, she hired a professional moving crew to completely empty our house. She took the beds, she took the dining table, she left my 12-year-old daughter with nothing but a metal chair and a bag of dog food. The viewer count on the live stream was skyrocketing with terrifying speed. 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 viewers. People love a tragic downfall, especially when it involves wealthy, prominent figures in the Atlanta social scene. The comments were pouring in like a toxic tidal wave. People I did not even know were calling me a monster, a raging narcissist, and a bitter career woman who placed corporate greed over motherhood. Then Derek played his ultimate card. He panned the camera over to Chloe. My 12-year-old daughter was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees tightly to her chest. She looked genuinely exhausted from sleeping on the hardwood, but her tears were absolutely weaponized. She was crying because she had lost her luxuries, but Derek spun the narrative perfectly for his hungry audience. "Mommy hates me," Chloe sobbed into the camera. Reading the exact emotional script her father had undoubtedly drilled into her head all morning. She was always working. She never wanted to spend time with us. And when I asked her to stay home and help me with my dog, she completely snapped. She took my designer clothes. She took my gaming computer. Dad says she even emptied my college fund so I cannot go to school. I did not touch her college fund. It was locked in an educational trust that I exclusively managed completely out of Derek's reach, ensuring her future was protected from his financial incompetence. But the truth did not matter to the internet. The internet thrives on outrage and blind judgment. Derek pulled the camera back to his face dramatically, wiping a fake tear from his cheek. "I am a proud black man," he said humbly, looking directly into the lens. "I run a sports agency, and I have always provided for my family. But my wife froze all of our joint assets in the middle of the night. She locked me out of the bank accounts. She is trying to financially starve me into giving up custody of my beautiful daughter. I have set up a GoFundMe link in my bio to help cover emergency legal fees and get a hotel room so my child does not have to sleep on the floor tonight. Anything helps. Please pray for us." I watched the GoFundMe tracker on my secondary monitor. It was updating in real time. In less than 20 minutes, sympathetic strangers and gullible followers had donated over $40,000. Derek was actively attempting to crowdfund his way out of the financial grave I had just dug for him. He thought public pressure would force me to fold. He thought I would be absolutely terrified of the social stigma of being labeled a toxic, abusive mother in our community. My office phone rang violently, breaking the heavy silence of the room. It was the internal line. My executive assistant sounded genuinely panicked. "Vanessa, the board of directors is requesting an emergency meeting in conference room A, right now. The corporate phone lines are ringing off the hook. Major clients are calling about the viral video. It is getting picked up by local news blogs and gossip sites." I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my charcoal blazer, and walked out of my office. I did not look panicked. I did not rush or run. I walked down the long glass hallway with the measured, steady pace of an executioner approaching the block. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the boardroom. 5 of my senior partners, all older men who had always been slightly intimidated by my authority, were sitting around the grand mahogany table. Their faces were pale with anxiety. The massive presentation screen at the end of the room was looping muted snippets of Derek's live stream. "Vanessa, this is a public relations nightmare," our senior compliance officer blurted out the second I walked into the room. "The optics on this are catastrophic. He is framing you as an abusive, financially controlling spouse. We manage risk for Fortune 500 companies. We cannot have the founder of the firm trending on social media as a domestic tyrant. You need to release a press statement immediately. You need to apologize. Say it was a severe marital misunderstanding and get that furniture back in his house before the market closes." I walked directly to the head of the table and leaned forward, resting my palms flat against the cool, polished wood. "I am not releasing a statement. I am not apologizing, and I am certainly not returning a single piece of furniture to that parasite." The lead partner frowned deeply, standing up to challenge me. "Vanessa, be reasonable. The public does not care about the facts. They see a crying black child on an empty floor. If you do not contain this immediately, we will lose major corporate clients. We might have to invoke the moral turpitude clause and ask you to temporarily step down as chief executive officer until your messy divorce is finalized." I looked directly into his eyes, my expression utterly devoid of fear or hesitation. "If you even attempt to ask me to step down, I will dissolve this firm and take my entire client portfolio with me to a competitor. Do not ever mistake my silence on social media for weakness. Derek wants a public war because he has absolutely zero private leverage. He is trying to manipulate public opinion because it is the only currency he has left. But public opinion does not pay federal taxes. Public opinion does not clear massive corporate debt." I pulled out my phone, connected it wirelessly to the boardroom projector, and mirrored my screen for the entire room to see. I opened my secure, high-level corporate banking application. I want you all to pay very close attention to how a real financial risk manager handles a liability. Derek's entire sports agency relied on a massive rolling line of credit from a major national commercial bank. For the last 3 years, the only reason the bank had not called in that massive debt was because my firm and my personal wealth acted as the primary corporate guarantor. Derek had fraudulently forged my signature to renew the guarantee 6 months ago. A fact I had clearly uncovered in the forensic audit the night before. I opened the direct messaging portal to my executive banking liaison. I typed a swift, formal, and legally binding message. Effective immediately, Vanessa Holdings, LLC, is formally withdrawing all financial backing and corporate guarantees for Elite Athletics Management. Furthermore, we are filing an official fraud report regarding the forged signature on the current credit extension. Freeze all associated accounts pending federal investigation. I pressed send. I looked up at my stunned board of directors. Gentlemen, the PR nightmare will be completely over by 3 o'clock this afternoon. Because by 3 o'clock, Derek will no longer be a sympathetic, heartbroken father on Instagram. He will be a headline in the Wall Street Journal for corporate fraud. The partners stared at the massive screen in absolute breathless silence. They realized I was not playing a defensive, emotional game. I was operating entirely on the offensive. I dismissed the meeting without waiting for their approval and walked back to my office to watch the dominoes fall. At exactly 2:15 in the afternoon, the grand illusion of Derek's successful sports agency imploded in real time. I watched it unfold through a series of frantic text messages sent to my phone by Derek's betrayed and panicked employees. His agency issued corporate payroll every other Friday. Today was Friday. When the direct deposits attempted to clear the automated clearinghouse at 2 o'clock, the bank, having received my fraud notice and immediate withdrawal of guarantee, instantly froze every single account attached to his business. The paychecks violently bounced. Not just for his administrative staff and receptionists, but for the multi-million-dollar professional athletes he represented. Within 30 minutes, 3 of his highest-profile NFL clients took to Twitter publicly demanding to know why their massive endorsement checks had bounced and why their agent was suddenly ignoring their furious calls. The GoFundMe campaign that Derek had set up to garner sympathy was suddenly flooded with angry, aggressive comments from his own clients and independent contractors accusing him of stealing their money. The internet narrative shifted violently and permanently. He was no longer the heartbroken father fighting against a cruel wife. He was an exposed fraudster whose fake empire had just collapsed on a brutally public stage. My phone buzzed on my desk. It was an email marked high priority from Derek's lawyer. It was not a plea for peace or a request for mediation. It was a desperate, vicious threat. He had officially filed an emergency legal injunction for sole physical custody of Chloe, demanding $50,000 a month in spousal support and child maintenance. The incredibly arrogant email claimed that because I was the primary breadwinner and because I had exhibited erratic and emotionally abusive behavior by clearing the house, he was entitled to remain in the property and receive a permanent guaranteed salary from my firm. He was trying to use the family court system to force me to perpetually fund his bankrupt life. I forwarded the email directly to Richard, my wealth management attorney in Chicago, with a single clear instruction: destroy him in court. But as I sat there in the quiet of my office looking at his aggressive legal threats, a sudden chilling realization washed over me. Derek was desperate. He was acting exactly like a cornered animal lashing out, but the level of absolute panic he was displaying over money seemed disproportionate even for a bankrupt sports agent losing his clients. The fake lavish vacation to Monaco. The specific demanding request that I wire him $20,000 in cash for the Monte Carlo casino right before he left. The absolute unhinged rage when I canceled the trip and grounded him in Atlanta. It did not make sense. Why was he so desperately obsessed with getting to a European tax haven when his domestic business was actively, visibly collapsing? I opened the thick forensic accounting file I had brought back from Chicago. I flipped past the domestic checking accounts, past Keisha's fraudulent luxury condo lease, and dug straight into the encrypted offshore routing numbers my team had decrypted. I needed to know exactly what was waiting for him in Monaco, and what I found on page 72 made my blood run absolutely cold. The true scale of his betrayal was far darker and infinitely more dangerous than infidelity or bad business. Page 72 of the forensic audit was not a standard ledger. It was a highly encrypted communication log and a series of offshore wire transfers that Richard's team had managed to unearth from Derek's hidden servers. The numbers painted a terrifying picture. Derek was not simply a failing sports agent making bad investments. He was a desperate man in bed with a highly organized, international sports betting syndicate. Over the past 3 years, to fund his fake lifestyle and keep up appearances in the affluent, highly competitive circles of Black Atlanta society, he had taken massive illegal loans from these dangerous people. He owed them exactly $5 million. The syndicate was demanding clean money. Monaco was not a family vacation. It was the drop point. The Hotel de Paris and the Monte Carlo casinos were the perfect cover for high-level international money laundering. But Derek did not have $5 million of clean money. I did. And he had forged my signature on documents preparing to transfer that exact amount from my corporate holdings to the casino under the guise of high roller gambling losses. But to finalize the transfer without triggering international money laundering alarms, he needed me physically present in Monaco. He needed my face on the casino cameras. And he needed my actual fingerprint on the authorization forms. He was going to drug me or manipulate me or forge my credentials while I was sleeping in that luxury suite. He was going to wash $5 million of syndicate blood money through my pristine corporate accounts. If the federal government ever found out, the paper trail would point entirely to me. Derek was planning to let me take the fall. He was going to sacrifice my freedom, my company, and my entire life to save his own skin. When my bratty, entitled 12-year-old daughter ripped my first-class ticket in half at the airport, she had not just insulted me. She had unknowingly severed the final link in a federal money laundering conspiracy. Her temper tantrum had literally saved me from a 20-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. While I sat in my office absorbing the terrifying reality of his criminal plot, Derek was doubling down on his public smear campaign. The freezing of his bank accounts had sent him into a blind, desperate frenzy. Because he could no longer access the offshore money the syndicate was undoubtedly breathing down his neck. He needed cash immediately. And he decided the fastest way to extort me was to escalate the social media war into the mainstream press. The next morning, Derek appeared on a highly syndicated urban morning radio show broadcasted across Atlanta. He had dragged Chloe into the studio with him. I listened to the broadcast from my desk, my jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Derek played the role of the emasculated, financially abused Black father to absolute perfection. He told the radio host that I had frozen his accounts out of pure spite, deliberately bouncing the paychecks of innocent athletes just to ruin his reputation. He painted me as the ultimate villain, the cold corporate woman who had lost her soul to capitalism. And then he put our daughter on the microphone. "Mommy cares more about her bank accounts than she cares about me." Chloe's small, trembling voice echoed over the airwaves. "She left us in an empty house with no beds. She took all my clothes. I do not even have a place to do my homework. I just want my dad to be okay." The radio hosts ate it up. They launched into a passionate diatribe about how modern, successful women are destroying the nuclear family, and how a wife's first duty is to her husband's peace of mind. The public humiliation was intense, but it was only the smokescreen. The real weapon was the emergency legal filing his attorney had aggressively pushed through the family court system that afternoon. Derek was officially suing for sole physical and legal custody of Chloe. The petition was a masterpiece of gaslighting filled with therapeutic buzzwords. It claimed I was exhibiting narcissistic financial abuse and alienating the father figure. It demanded $50,000 a month in temporary child support and alimony, requesting a judge force me to reinstate his corporate credit lines to maintain the standard of living the child was accustomed to. He was using our daughter as a human shield and a financial hostage. I did not cry. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly evil, that it completely burned away any lingering affection I had for the man I married. The expectations placed on successful Black women in this city are suffocating. We are expected to build empires, but we are also expected to shrink ourselves so our men can feel like kings. I had played that role perfectly, funding his delusions of grandeur, paying for the luxury cars and the country club memberships. But he had taken my loyalty and weaponized it. I was no longer dealing with a cheating, arrogant husband. I was dealing with a federal criminal who viewed me as collateral damage. It was time to involve the heavy artillery. I picked up my encrypted mobile phone and dialed a number I had not used in 5 years. It belonged to an old college friend from Spelman, a brilliant woman named Valerie, who was now a senior investigator for the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. Valerie and I had maintained a quiet mutual respect for years. When she answered, I did not exchange pleasantries. I have a $5 million offshore money laundering file tied to an illegal sports betting syndicate, I told her, and I can hand you the primary facilitator on a silver platter. Over the next 2 hours, Valerie and I formulated a flawless, ironclad sting operation. The federal government had been trying to build a case against this specific betting syndicate for years, but they lacked the domestic financial links. I had the entire paper trail sitting on my desk. But to arrest Derek without triggering a prolonged, messy legal battle where he could destroy evidence or flee the country, we needed him totally off guard. We needed him arrogant, triumphant, and publicly visible. Derek's sports agency hosted an annual charity gala every spring. It was a massive, highly publicized event at one of Atlanta's most exclusive hotels, designed to showcase his high-profile clients and attract new investors. The gala was scheduled for this coming Friday. It was his last desperate attempt to project success and secure emergency funding from wealthy donors to pay off his syndicate debts. It was the perfect stage for an execution. I picked up my personal phone and unblocked Derek's number. I needed him to believe that his aggressive social media campaign and his terrifying custody threats had finally broken my spirit. I typed a message carefully calibrated to feed his massive, fragile ego. Derek, you win. I cannot handle the public backlash anymore. The board is threatening my position. Please, stop the radio interviews. Let us meet at your charity gala on Friday. I will bring the legal paperwork to reinstate your corporate accounts, and I will drop the divorce proceedings if you withdraw the custody petition. We can rebook the Monaco trip next week. Just tell me what to wear. I hit send and watched the delivery receipt. Less than a minute later, the typing bubble appeared. Derek could not resist the taste of victory. He truly believed he had dominated me, that his public shaming had successfully forced the wealthy independent black woman back into her place. His reply was dripping with sickening arrogance. I knew you would finally remember your place, V. You pushed me to do this. Bring the papers to the VIP suite before my keynote speech. Wear the red silk dress. Make me look good in front of the cameras. I stared at the message, a cold, predatory smile spreading across my face. I immediately called my personal stylist and ordered the red silk dress. I wanted to look absolutely flawless for the cameras, but the only paperwork I would be bringing to the gala was the sworn signed federal affidavit granting the IRS and the FBI complete, unrestricted access to every single fraudulent account he had ever opened. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and Derek was about to walk onto the grandest stage of his life, entirely unaware that it was his own scaffold. Tuesday morning arrived with the aggressive pounding of a process server at the glass doors of my corporate office. Derek, emboldened by my fake surrender via text message, decided to twist the knife. He wanted to ensure I was completely paralyzed by fear before his charity gala on Friday. The process server, a burly man, who looked entirely out of place in my high-end lobby, handed my assistant a thick stack of legal documents. It was the official expedited filing for the emergency custody injunction and spousal support. I took the heavy manila envelope into my private office, closed the electronic blinds, and read through his demands. They were nothing short of extortion disguised as family law. Derek claimed that my actions of emptying the house had caused severe psychological trauma to our daughter Chloe. He weaponized the tears she shed on his viral live stream, using them as documented evidence of my unfitness as a mother. He painted a picture of a cold, absentee corporate executive who abandoned her family in a fit of manic rage. He demanded sole physical and legal custody, but the real objective was buried on page 4 of the petition. He was requesting $50,000 a month in permanent alimony, claiming that as the primary breadwinner, I had accustomed him to a certain lifestyle that I was now legally obligated to maintain. Furthermore, he demanded an immediate court-ordered reinstatement of his corporate credit cards to prevent his sports agency from going into receivership, citing it as essential for the stability of our child. He was trying to use a family court judge to force me to continue funding his criminal enterprise. I did not panic. I did not throw the papers or call my divorce attorney in a rage. I simply placed the custody petition on the corner of my desk and called Julian, my lead forensic accountant, into my office. Julian was a brilliant, meticulous numbers guy who had spent the last 48 hours tearing apart the encrypted offshore ledgers we had pulled from Derek's private servers. We needed to package the raw data into a flawless, undeniable narrative for Valerie and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Division before Friday night. Julian walked in carrying a stack of oversized flowcharts and laid them across my mahogany desk. He traced the complex web of shell companies Derek had set up in the Cayman Islands. He pointed to a series of massive pending transactions highlighted in red. Derek is bleeding out rapidly, Vanessa Julian explained, his finger tapping the heavy paper. His sports agency has been running a shadow Ponzi scheme for 2 years. He has been taking the sign-on bonuses from his new NFL clients and immediately routing that money offshore to pay the interest on his gambling debts to the syndicate. But the syndicate stopped accepting domestic wire transfers last month. The feds have been cracking down on digital transactions, so the syndicate demanded the $5 million principal balance be washed clean through a European casino. Julian then walked me through the exact chilling mechanics of the Monte Carlo trap Derek had meticulously designed. The Hotel de Paris and the attached casino operate under specific high-roller international banking regulations. Derek had pre-authorized a massive line of casino credit using my corporate tax identification numbers. His plan was to gamble aggressively at the private tables, intentionally lose a small portion of the syndicate's dirty money to the house to make it look authentic, and then cash out the remaining millions as clean documented casino winnings. But the European banking authorities require the primary corporate guarantor to physically verify the credit line in person for amounts over $1 million. Derek needed my physical passport, he needed my biometric signature, and most importantly, he needed my face captured on the casino security cameras sitting next to him at the VIP tables. He was going to wait until I was exhausted from the long transatlantic flight. He would have poured me a glass of expensive champagne in our luxury suite, played the role of the loving romantic husband, and casually slid a stack of French banking documents in front of me. He would have told me they were just standard hotel liability waivers or customs declarations by signing those papers. I would have officially attached my name, my firm, and my entire spotless financial history to $5 million of international blood money. If the federal authorities ever raided the syndicate, the paper trail would lead directly to my desk in Atlanta. Derek would have claimed complete ignorance. He would have played the role of the oblivious, manipulated husband, pointing the finger directly at the wealthy, controlling wife who managed all the finances. I would have taken the fall for federal money laundering. I sat back in my leather chair, the chill of the office air conditioning suddenly feeling like ice against my skin. The sheer magnitude of his sociopathic planning was breathtaking. He had planned this fake family vacation for 6 months. He had talked up the yacht parties and the Mediterranean sunsets to Chloe, building her excitement using our own child as a prop to ensure I got on that plane. He had actively plotted my total destruction with a smile on his face. And then my mind drifted back to the VIP check-in counter at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. I pictured Chloe standing there, her face contorted in arrogant, bratty entitlement. I saw the torn pieces of my first-class boarding pass fluttering to the polished marble floor. I heard her shrill voice demanding that I stay home to watch her $5,000 dog because I was nothing but an ATM machine. In that exact moment at the airport, I had felt profound disgust and heartbreak. I had looked at my daughter and realized she was entirely corrupted by her father. But sitting in my office looking at the 20-year federal prison sentence mapped out on Julian's flowcharts, that heartbreak transformed into a bizarre, overwhelming realization of absolute irony. Chloe's extreme entitlement, the very monster Derek had created by spoiling her and constantly undermining my maternal authority, had been the exact thing that derailed his master plan. If Derek had raised a respectful, well-behaved daughter, she would have quietly boarded that flight to Nice. I would have flown to Monaco. I would have signed those French banking papers. I would have been indicted by the federal government. By ripping up my plane ticket and throwing a massive tantrum, Chloe had inadvertently severed the fuse on a financial bomb. Her utter disrespect had literally saved my life, my freedom, and the multi-million-dollar company I had built from the ground up. She was a deeply flawed child, but she was also my accidental savior. It was a dark, twisted paradox that I would have to unpack later. Right now. I only had time for execution. I thanked Julian and took the finalized, highly classified financial dossier. I spent the next 2 days in absolute radio silence. I did not respond to Derek's increasingly smug text messages. I did not issue a public statement defending myself against his viral livestream or the brutal comments circulating through the Atlanta gossip blogs. I let him bask in the false glory of his public relations victory. I let him believe that his ruthless custody lawsuit and public shaming had successfully terrified me into submission. By Thursday evening, Derek was texting me pictures of the grand ballroom at the hotel, showing off the VIP tables at the charity gala. He was reminding me to bring the corporate checkbook and the legal documents releasing his frozen assets. I forwarded every single one of his messages along with the GPS coordinates of the hotel directly to Valerie at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. She responded with a single thumbs-up emoji confirming that a joint task force of federal agents would be wearing civilian formal wear stationed at every exit of the ballroom. Friday afternoon finally arrived. I left the corporate office early and went back to my penthouse hotel suite in Buckhead. My personal stylist had delivered the red silk dress I requested. It was a masterpiece of haute couture design. It was sleek, elegant, commanding, and absolutely unapologetic. It was the kind of dress a woman wears when she wants every single eye in the room locked on her the moment she steps through the doors. Derek had ordered me to wear it because he wanted me to look like a trophy. He wanted me to stand silently by his side, projecting the image of the loyal, supportive black wife, making him look successful and grounded in front of his wealthy donors and the local press. I was wearing it for a very different reason. I was wearing it to make sure nobody in that room ever forgot the moment I buried him. I stepped into my designer heels and clasped a heavy diamond tennis bracelet around my wrist. I looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The tired, exhausted woman who had stood at the airport just a few days ago was completely gone. I was no longer the overworked ATM machine carrying a man-child on her back. I was a weapon of absolute financial destruction. I picked up my evening clutch. It did not contain a checkbook. It contained nothing but my favorite shade of dark lipstick and the sworn signed federal affidavit that would authorize the immediate seizure of Derek's entire life. I walked out of the penthouse, the red silk trailing behind me, and stepped into the private elevator. The charity gala was about to begin, and it was time to give my husband the exact public spectacle he had been begging for. The doors of the private elevator glided shut, sealing me in a quiet, mirrored box as I descended toward the lobby. I took a deep breath, letting the cool silk of the red dress settle against my skin. I was no longer just a wife or a CEO. I was the architect of my own justice. The ride down felt like a transition between two worlds. The woman who had tolerated Derek's disrespect for 12 years was dead. The woman stepping out of the elevator was entirely ruthless. I handed my keys to the valet outside the grand entrance of the hotel. The charity gala was already in full swing. Valets were rushing to park a parade of luxury SUVs and imported sports cars. The red carpet was rolled out, flanked by local press photographers and minor social media influencers looking for a photo opportunity. This was Derek's element. He thrived on the flashing bulbs and the superficial air kisses of high society. As I walked through the towering glass doors and handed my coat to the attendant, the sheer scale of his delusion became apparent. The grand ballroom was dripping in crystal chandeliers and towering arrangements of white orchids. Waiters in crisp tuxedos circulated with silver trays of champagne and expensive appetizers. Derek had spared absolutely no expense, likely using the last remaining fumes of his stolen credit to fund this massive masquerade. He needed this room to be breathtaking so he could believe he was invincible. The moment I stepped past the velvet ropes and entered the main ballroom, the atmospheric shift was immediate and palpable. The loud buzzing chatter of 500 wealthy guests began to drop section by section like a wave of sudden gravity. Heads turned. Glasses paused halfway to lips. The viral livestream had done its job perfectly. To almost everyone in this room, I was the villain. I was the heartless corporate ice queen who had abandoned her family, traumatized her daughter, and financially castrated a good, hardworking man. I felt the heavy, judgmental stares burning into my back, but I kept my posture impossibly straight. I did not avert my eyes. I walked through the crowd with the slow, measured grace of a predator. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted my mother-in-law Estelle and Keisha huddled near a lavish ice sculpture. Keisha was wearing an ill-fitting designer gown, clutching a cocktail glass so tightly her knuckles were white. When she saw me, her face drained of all color. She knew about the federal lawsuit sitting on her kitchen counter. She knew I had the power to destroy her life with a single phone call. She quickly turned her back, pretending to be deeply engrossed in a conversation, terrified that I might expose her right there. Estelle simply glared at me with pure, unfiltered hatred, wrapping a protective arm around Chloe, who was sitting at a VIP table looking bored and scrolling on her phone. Then the crowd parted and Derek appeared. He was wearing a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that I had paid for. His smile was blinding, weaponized for the cameras flashing around us. He walked toward me with his arms wide open, playing the role of the forgiving, magnanimous husband who was graciously welcoming his erratic wife back into the fold. Vanessa, he projected his voice loudly so the surrounding guests and reporters could hear. You look absolutely stunning. I am so glad you decided to do the right thing and come home to us. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a tight, suffocating embrace. For the cameras, it looked like a beautiful reconciliation. But as his mouth brushed against my ear, his voice dropped to a vicious, venomous whisper. You actually showed up, he sneered softly, his grip tightening around my waist to the point of pain. I knew you did not have the stomach for a public war. Where are the papers, V? Hand over the corporate checkbook and the asset release forms right now, or I swear to God I will march Chloe up to that microphone and have her tell this entire room how you used to lock her in closets. My blood turned to ice at the sheer depravity of his threat. He was willing to fabricate severe child abuse allegations on a live microphone just to secure his offshore money. He was truly a monster without a bottom. I pulled back from his embrace, keeping a serene, manufactured smile on my face for the onlookers. I gently brushed my hand against the lapel of his tuxedo, smoothing the expensive fabric. I do not negotiate with terrorists. Derek, I whispered back, my voice so quiet and cold it barely registered over the ambient jazz music playing in the background. The paperwork is exactly where it needs to be. But I do love a good PowerPoint presentation. Let us see how the crowd likes your speech first. Derek frowned, a brief flash of confusion crossing his features. He glanced at my small evening clutch, realizing there was no way a corporate checkbook or a stack of legal documents could fit inside. But his arrogance quickly swallowed his doubt. He assumed I had left the documents in the coat check or with my driver. He assumed he had already won. Just sit at the table and smile, he ordered through gritted teeth. Do not embarrass me tonight, Vanessa. Your reputation is already hanging by a thread. I nodded gracefully and glided over to the VIP table, taking a seat directly across from Estelle and Chloe. Chloe rolled her eyes when I sat down, purposefully turning her chair slightly away from me. I did not correct her. I simply signaled a waiter and ordered a glass of sparkling water. The lights in the grand ballroom began to dim. The ambient chatter faded into an expectant hush as a bright spotlight hit the main stage. The jazz band concluded their set, and the master of ceremonies, a prominent local news anchor, stepped up to the podium. He delivered a glowing, nauseating introduction about Derek's supposed philanthropic efforts and his dedication to the city's youth sports programs. Derek practically floated onto the stage. The applause was thunderous. He adjusted the microphone, looking out over the sea of wealthy donors, politicians, and high-profile athletes. He was at the absolute pinnacle of his fake empire. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Derek began, his voice oozing with practiced charisma. We are here to talk about legacy. We are here to talk about building something that outlasts us. It has been a challenging week for my family, as many of you know. But adversity only makes us stronger. It shows us who we truly are. He paused perfectly for dramatic effect, placing a hand over his heart. I sat in the darkness sipping my water, watching a condemned man deliver his own eulogy. Tonight, I want to show you the future of elite athletics management. Derek continued gesturing toward the massive ceiling above the stage. If we could lower the main screen, please. I have a short video presentation that highlights the incredible work we have been doing behind the scenes. Right on cue, the heavy motorized projector screen slowly descended from the ceiling behind him. The high-definition projector hummed to life. Derek turned his back to the audience, looking up at the screen with a wide, expectant smile, waiting for his slick, highly produced promotional video to play. In the back of the room, standing near the audio-visual control booth, I caught the eye of a man wearing a crisp tuxedo. He was not a hotel employee. He was one of Valerie's undercover federal agents. I gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The screen flickered to life, but the booming, inspirational music did not play. There were no slow-motion clips of football players running through practice drills. Instead, the massive screen illuminated the dark ballroom with a stark, blindingly bright spreadsheet. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Derek squinted at the screen, his smile faltering. He tapped the microphone. "Apologies, ladies and gentlemen, looks like we have a slight technical difficulty with the AV team. Give us just 1 second. He aggressively waved his hand at the control booth, mouthing the words to fix it. But the screen did not change. Instead, the spreadsheet zoomed in, highlighting specific rows of data in bright, undeniable crimson. The text was massive, easily readable from the very back of the ballroom. It was not just any spreadsheet. It was the decrypted offshore banking ledger. I stood up from my chair at the VIP table. The silk of my red dress caught the light as I walked slowly toward the center aisle. The room fell dead silent, the confusion rapidly morphing into uncomfortable tension. I picked up a wireless microphone resting on a nearby cocktail table. I switched it on. "There is no technical difficulty, Derek," my voice echoed through the massive ballroom, sharp and clear as cut glass. The sound system had been perfectly calibrated. Derek froze on the stage. He looked down at me, his eyes widening in absolute horror. "Vanessa, what are you doing?" he hissed, trying to cover the microphone on his podium, but his voice still bled through the speakers. "Sit down." I ignored him. I turned to face the 500 guests, my gaze sweeping across the faces of the city's elite. My husband loves to tell people that I am a cold, heartless woman who just stares at spreadsheets all day. I announced, my tone conversational, but laced with lethal authority. He told the entire internet that I abandoned my family. So since everyone in this room has already judged my character based on his viral tears, I thought it was only fair that we look at one of my spreadsheets together. I pointed up at the massive screen behind him. "Let us draw our attention to row 14, I instructed the crowd. "You will see a recurring monthly wire transfer of $4,800. Derek claimed this was a corporate storage fee. It is actually the rent for a luxury Buckhead penthouse where he has been keeping his 24-year-old mistress for the last 2 years. A loud collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. The flashbulbs of the press photographers suddenly ignited, creating a strobe light effect across the room. Investors began shouting, scrambling away from the VIP tables as if Derek were radioactive. Estelle sat paralyzed in her chair, her jaw hanging open, her precious pearls clutched in a white-knuckled grip as she stared at the undeniable proof of her son's infidelity. Derek's face turned ashen. He stumbled backward into the podium. "Cut the feed!" he screamed into the microphone, his polished persona completely shattering. "Somebody cut the damn feed right now. This is a lie. She is having a mental breakdown." The agent in the control booth did not cut the feed. He clicked to the next slide. I took a few more steps down the aisle, completely commanding the room. "That is just the appetizer, ladies and gentlemen. Now please look at row 22. The screen shifted to a series of massive international wire transfers, complete with routing numbers from the Cayman Islands and intercepted syndicate communications. That row details $5 million in illegal sports gambling debts. I declared, my voice rising over the rising panic in the room. Debts owed to an offshore syndicate. Debts that my husband planned to pay off by laundering money through a casino in Monaco using my forged corporate signatures. He was not taking his family on a vacation. He was setting his wife up to take the fall for a federal crime. Absolute chaos erupted. Derek practically leaped off the stage, sprinting toward the control booth, screaming obscenities. Keisha shrieked from the side of the room, dropping her drink and frantically pushing her way toward the nearest emergency exit. But before Derek could even make it past the front row of tables, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom violently burst open. It was not hotel security. It was a dozen men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers over their formal wear. The bold yellow letters on the back of their jackets were unmistakable. Federal agents. Nobody move, a booming voice commanded over a megaphone. Stay in your seats. The trap had officially snapped shut. But the true masterpiece of this execution was not the moment the federal agents burst through the doors. The true masterpiece was the psychological warfare that unfolded in the 45 minutes leading up to that exact second. To truly understand the gravity of his downfall, let me take you back to the moment my driver first pulled up to the grand entrance of the hotel earlier that evening. The exterior of the luxury high-rise was swarming with local media society photographers and a fleet of luxury vehicles. This was the most anticipated charity gala of the season in Atlanta. Derek had pulled out all the stops, using the last drops of his fraudulent credit to create an illusion of absolute royalty. Valets were sprinting back and forth, opening the doors of Bentleys and Maybachs. I stepped out of my black town car. The cool evening air brushed against the red silk of my dress. It was a masterpiece of haute couture designed to be both elegant and unapologetic. I took a deep breath, handed my keys to the attendant, and walked through the towering glass doors. The grand foyer was a masterclass in superficial opulence. The air was thick with the scent of expensive Tom Ford cologne, imported lilies, and roasted truffles. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of vintage champagne. These were the power brokers of the city. Corporate CEOs, local politicians, real estate moguls, and high-profile professional athletes mingled under the massive crystal chandeliers. And right in the center of it all was Derek. He was playing the triumphant king to absolute perfection. He was wearing a custom-tailored velvet tuxedo that hugged his frame, a charismatic smile plastered across his face. He held a glass of champagne in one hand, and with the other, he was parading our 12-year-old daughter around like a prized prop. Chloe was wearing a designer gown, looking overwhelmed but soaking in the attention. Derek was introducing her to potential investors, painting a sickening picture of the resilient, devoted single father fighting to keep his family afloat after his wealthy, heartless wife abandoned them in the middle of the night. Every time a press camera flashed, he would lean down and kiss Chloe on the forehead. The hypocrisy was so thick I could practically taste it. As I entered the main ballroom, the atmospheric shift was immediate and undeniable. The lively jazz music seemed to fade into the background as heads began to turn in my direction. The viral livestream had done its job flawlessly. To the 500 people in this room, I was public enemy number one. I could hear the hushed whispers rippling through the crowd like a virus. I saw the judgmental stares from the affluent women who had happily drank my expensive wine at my house parties just a month prior. One woman, a prominent real estate broker I had helped secure funding for, actively turned her back to me and pretended to admire an ice sculpture. The societal expectations placed on successful Black women in this city are suffocating. You are expected to build the empire, but you are also expected to silently endure the disrespect to protect the image of the Black family. If you dare to stand up for yourself, you are labeled angry, bitter, or masculine. I knew exactly what they saw when they looked at me, but I kept my posture impossibly straight. I did not avert my eyes. I walked through the crowd with the slow, measured grace of a predator who already knew she owned the room. Derek spotted me from across the ballroom. A smug, victorious smile spread across his face. He thought my presence was a white flag. He thought the public pressure had finally broken my spirit. He whispered something to Chloe, handed his champagne glass to a passing waiter, and confidently strode toward me. He intercepted me near a massive towering arrangement of white orchids, deliberately positioning his body to block me from the direct view of the main press pool. He wrapped his arms around me in a fake, suffocating embrace, smiling broadly for anyone who might be watching from a distance. But as his mouth hovered near my ear, the charming facade completely vanished. His voice dropped to a vicious, venomous whisper. "You actually showed up," he sneered softly, his fingers digging painfully into my waist. "I knew you did not have the stomach for a public war. Your corporate board must be terrified of the bad press. Where are the papers, Vanessa? Hand over the corporate checkbook and the asset release forms right now." I pulled back slightly, keeping a serene manufactured smile on my face for the onlookers. "I do not have a checkbook, Derek," I replied quietly, maintaining perfect eye contact. His grip tightened, his eyes flashing with sudden violent anger. The veins in his neck bulged against his crisp white collar. "Do not play games with me tonight," he hissed. "You think you can just show up looking like that and defy me in front of my investors? I am holding this entire event together with duct tape, Vanessa. The syndicate is calling my personal phone every hour. You are going to sign the agency back over to me, and you are going to restore my credit lines before I walk onto that stage." "And what if I refuse?" I asked, my voice calm and completely devoid of fear. Derek leaned in closer, his breath hot against my cheek. "If you do not sign those papers right now, I have a producer from Good Morning America on speed dial. Tomorrow morning, I will put Chloe on a plane to New York. She goes on national television and tells the entire country that you hit her. She will tell them you are physically and emotionally abusive. She will cry on camera and say whatever I tell her to say. Your corporate career will be permanently destroyed. The board of directors will force you out of your own company by noon. You will be a pariah in this city. No one will ever do business with a mother who abuses her child. I will take everything you have built and leave you with nothing." I stared at him, absorbing the absolute darkness of his soul. For 12 years, I had made excuses for him. I had blamed his failures on bad luck and tough market conditions. I had convinced myself that beneath his arrogance there was a man who loved his family. But standing here listening to him plot the psychological destruction of our daughter just to save his own skin, the final illusion shattered. He was a parasite, and he had finally bitten too deep. My blood turned to absolute ice. The sheer depravity of his threat was staggering. He was willing to fabricate severe child abuse allegations, willing to use our own daughter to commit perjury on national television just to secure his offshore money. He viewed Chloe not as a child, but as a weapon of mass destruction, to be deployed whenever his ego or his wallet was threatened. He was truly a monster without a bottom. I looked him dead in the eye. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I gently brushed my hand against the lapel of his custom tuxedo, smoothing the expensive fabric with mocking affection. "I do not negotiate with terrorists, Derek," I whispered back, my voice so quiet and cold it barely registered over the ambient noise of the ballroom. "And I certainly do not negotiate with desperate men who use their children as human shields. The paperwork is exactly where it needs to be, but I do love a good PowerPoint presentation. Let us see how the crowd likes your speech first." Derek frowned, a brief flash of genuine confusion crossing his features. He glanced down at my small evening clutch, realizing there was no way a corporate checkbook or a thick stack of legal documents could fit inside. But his arrogance was a terminal disease. It quickly swallowed his doubt. He assumed I had left the documents in the coat check or with my driver outside. He assumed he had already won the psychological war, and I was just trying to save face in my final moments of defiance. "Just sit at the VIP table and smile," he ordered through gritted teeth, stepping back and resuming his fake charismatic posture. "Do not embarrass me tonight, Vanessa. Your reputation is already hanging by a thread." I nodded gracefully and walked away, taking my seat at the front table. Chloe was sitting there glaring at me. She crossed her arms and pointedly turned her chair away. I did not say a word to her. I simply signaled a waiter and ordered a glass of sparkling water. I scanned the perimeter of the room, mingled among the waiters and the guests. I spotted 3 men and 2 women wearing crisp tuxedos and evening gowns who did not quite fit the high society mold. They were Valerie's undercover federal agents quietly moving into position by the emergency exits. The lights in the grand ballroom began to dim, plunging the wealthy audience into an expectant hush. The master of ceremonies, a prominent local news anchor, stepped up to the podium. He delivered a glowing, nauseating introduction about Derek's supposed philanthropic efforts, praising his dedication to the city's youth sports programs and his resilience as a father. Derek practically floated onto the stage. The applause from the crowd was thunderous. He adjusted the microphone, looking out over the sea of wealthy donors. He delivered a passionate, perfectly rehearsed speech about legacy family and overcoming adversity. He played the victim perfectly, soaking up the sympathy of the elite society that had gathered to support his fraudulent empire. He spoke about the importance of trust and integrity in the sports management business. The irony was so sharp it could draw blood. As he finished his closing remarks, the crowd erupted into a standing ovation. Derek smiled, soaking in the adulation. Then he turned his back to the audience and faced the massive motorized screen behind him. He raised his hand and confidently signaled the audio-visual technician in the control booth to play his highly produced promotional video. The heavy white screen slowly descended from the ceiling, casting a pale glow over the stage. The high-definition projector hummed to life. The entire ballroom fell completely silent, waiting for the inspirational music to begin. The screen flickered brightly in the darkened room, but the booming music never started, and it was definitely not his video. Instead, a blinding white light washed over the stage, projecting a massive high-definition spreadsheet across the 20-foot display. The stark contrast of black grids and bright red highlighted rows illuminated Derek's shocked face. The document was meticulously organized, featuring the unmistakable watermarks of international banking institutions and a digital trail of encrypted wire transfers. At the very top of the page, displayed in bold black lettering, was the title of the document: Forensic Audit and Financial Intercept Elite Athletics Management. The initial reaction from the 500 guests was a collective confused silence. People leaned forward in their seats, squinting through the dim lighting of the ballroom, trying to make sense of the complex financial data towering over the stage. They had expected highlight reels of football players and heartwarming videos of inner-city youth programs. Instead, they were looking at bank routing numbers from the Cayman Islands and unauthorized credit extensions. The jazz band had completely stopped playing. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the high-definition projector. I stood up from my chair at the VIP table. The red silk of my dress caught the ambient light as I took a deliberate, unhurried step away from the center table. A secondary wireless microphone had been left on a nearby cocktail stand for the evening's charity auctioneer. I walked over, picked it up, and flipped the switch. A sharp, clear hum echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system, instantly cutting through the rising murmurs of the confused crowd. Derek loves to tell people that I am a cold, heartless woman who just stares at spreadsheets all day, I announced. My voice was completely steady, ringing out with lethal authority. It echoed off the crystal chandeliers and the grand walls of the ballroom, commanding absolute attention. He told the entire internet that I abandoned my family. So, since everyone in this room has already judged my character based on his viral tears, I thought it was only fair that we look at one of my spreadsheets together. Derek froze at the podium. He whipped his head around to look at the massive screen, his charismatic smile instantly collapsing into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He fumbled with his own microphone, trying to cover it with his hand, but his panicked, heavy breathing still bled through the speakers. "Vanessa, turn that off right now," he hissed, his voice trembling violently. "What are you doing?" I ignored him completely. I turned to face the sea of wealthy donors, investors, and local press. "Let us draw our attention to row 14. I instructed the crowd, raising my free hand to point at the screen. "You will see a recurring monthly wire transfer of $4,800. Derek claimed this was a corporate storage fee for his sister Keisha's boutique. It is actually the rent for a luxury Buckhead penthouse where he has been keeping his 24-year-old mistress for the last 2 years. A sharp collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. It was the sound of high society scandal detonating in real time. The flashbulbs of the local press photographers suddenly ignited, creating a chaotic strobe light effect across the darkened room. Wealthy wives turned to their husbands in absolute shock. Potential investors began aggressively whispering to one another, their faces turning pale as the reality of the situation began to set in. At the VIP table, Estelle sat perfectly paralyzed. Her jaw dropped open and the crystal champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering against the polished hardwood floor. She clutched her pearl necklace with a white-knuckled grip, staring at the undeniable proof of her golden child's infidelity plastered across a 20-foot screen. Beside her, Chloe looked up at the spreadsheet, her 12-year-old brain struggling to comprehend the massive numbers, but fully understanding the terrifying, aggressive shift in the room's energy. She shrank back into her chair, looking frantically between her father on the stage and me standing in the aisle. Derek practically lunged at the podium. "Cut the feed," he screamed, abandoning any pretense of dignity or charm. He waved his arms frantically at the control booth in the back of the room. "Somebody cut the damn feed right now. This is a lie. Turn off the projector." The undercover federal agent stationed inside the AV booth did not cut the feed. He simply clicked the mouse. Zooming in on the next set of data, I took a few steps down the center aisle, making sure every single person in that room was looking directly at me. I wanted them to see the woman they had spent the last 48 hours tearing apart on social media. "That is just the appetizer, ladies and gentlemen," I declared, projecting my voice over the rising panic and loud whispers. "Now, I want you all to look very closely at row 22. The screen shifted. The mistress's apartment lease disappeared, replaced by a series of massive international wire transfers. The numbers were staggering. Beside each transfer was a scanned copy of a corporate authorization form bearing a signature that clearly belonged to me but was entirely forged. Row 22. Details exactly $5 million in illegal sports gambling debts, I announced. The words struck the room like physical blows. Debts owed to a highly organized, violent offshore syndicate. My husband has been running a shadow Ponzi scheme with your investment money to pay the interest on those debts. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Men in expensive tuxedos leaped out of their chairs, shouting in anger. An NFL player sitting in the front row slammed his massive fist on the table, knocking over a centerpiece, realizing his entire signing bonus had likely been washed through a Cayman Islands shell company. People were pulling out their cell phones, desperately dialing their lawyers, their wealth managers, and their publicists. The pristine, elegant charity gala had transformed into a panicked crime scene in less than 60 seconds. He planned to pay off the principal balance by laundering the money through a casino in Monaco. Using my forged corporate signatures, I continued refusing to let the noise drown me out. He was not taking his family on a vacation to Europe. He was setting his wife up to take the fall for a federal crime. He was going to let me go to federal prison so he could keep playing the role of the successful sports agent. Derek completely lost his mind. The walls were closing in on him rapidly, and his instinct was to destroy the person exposing him. He ripped the microphone from the podium stand and screamed over the terrified crowd. "She is crazy!" he roared, sweat pouring down his face, completely ruining his custom Tom Ford suit. "She is having a mental breakdown. We are going through a bitter divorce, and she hacked my accounts to frame me. Do not listen to her. She is a sick, abusive woman. She emptied my house. She stole my daughter's college fund. Look at her. She is unhinged." He looked pathetic. The smooth, charismatic sports agent was gone, replaced by a cornered, desperate animal. He ran to the edge of the stage, pointing an accusing finger at me, begging his wealthy friends to believe his frantic lies. But nobody was looking at him with sympathy anymore. They were looking at him like he was a diseased rat. The investors who had shaken his hand just an hour ago were now shouting demands for their money back. Near the back of the room, Keisha finally realized exactly what was happening. She had seen her own fraudulent transactions detailed in the earlier rows of the spreadsheet. She knew her name was permanently tied to the corporate wire fraud that funded the mistress's apartment. The absolute paralyzing panic overtook her completely. She did not try to defend her brother. She did not try to comfort her mother or protect her niece. Her only thought was self-preservation. Keisha abandoned her family entirely. She dropped her designer clutch on the floor, kicked off her expensive heels so she could run faster, and tried to slip quietly toward the velvet-draped service corridor. She was trying to flee the hotel before the local police arrived, hoping she could somehow pack a bag and disappear before the financial crimes unit knocked on her door. But Keisha did not even make it 10 feet before Derek could scramble off the stage to rip the projector cord from the wall, and before Keisha could reach the brass handle of the service exit door, a deafening crash echoed through the massive venue. The heavy oak doors at the back of the grand ballroom violently burst open, striking the walls with a thunderous boom that shook the floorboards. The sound instantly silenced the screaming crowd. Everyone turned toward the entrance, frozen in place. It was not hotel security rushing in to break up a domestic dispute. It was not the local Atlanta Police Department responding to a noise complaint. A dozen men and women stormed into the room with terrifying speed and precision. They wore dark tactical windbreakers layered aggressively over their formal civilian wear. The bold, bright yellow letters printed across the back of their jackets were unmistakable under the glare of the crystal chandeliers. FBI, IRS Criminal Investigation Division. "Nobody move!" A booming authoritative voice commanded over a heavy-duty megaphone, cutting through the remaining whispers like a knife. "Stay exactly where you are. Keep your hands where we can see them." The federal raid had begun, and Derek's entire fake empire was about to be burned to the ground. The sheer velocity of the federal agents swarming the grand ballroom was a terrifying thing to witness. They moved with absolute uncompromising authority, forming a solid tactical wall between the panicked high society guests and the stage. The lead agent, my old college friend Valerie, stepped out from the tactical formation. She was no longer wearing her undercover evening gown. She had slipped on her heavy Kevlar vest, her federal badge gleaming aggressively under the ambient light of the crystal chandeliers. Her face was set in stone, completely devoid of the friendly warmth we used to share during our time at Spelman. Tonight, she was the blunt instrument of the United States government. Derek scrambled backward, his hands raised defensively in front of his chest. He looked like a cornered rat trapped under a blinding spotlight. Wait, you have the wrong guy," he stammered, his voice cracking loudly over the still, active microphone resting on the podium. "I am Derek. I run Elite Athletics. This is a private charity event. You cannot just barge in here. Let me call my legal team." Valerie did not entertain his desperate negotiation for even a fraction of a second. "Derek, you are under federal arrest for international money laundering, corporate wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes," she announced clearly. Her voice projected through the massive ballroom without needing any electronic amplification. "Put your hands behind your back and interlock your fingers." Derek refused. His massive, fragile ego simply could not process the reality of being physically subdued in front of the entire Atlanta elite. The investors, the athletes, the local politicians, they were all watching his total destruction. He took a sudden aggressive step to the left, his eyes darting frantically toward the side stage stairs, looking for a gap in the line of armed agents. It was the worst mistake he could have possibly made. Two heavily armed federal agents lunged forward with terrifying speed. They grabbed him by the lapels of his custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, spun him around violently, and slammed him face first against the heavy wooden podium. The sound of his chest hitting the solid wood echoed like a gunshot through the hotel sound system. Derek let out a pathetic, breathless yelp as the agents wrenched his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists was the final, undeniable punctuation on his fraudulent empire. They yanked him back to his feet roughly. His expensive velvet jacket was torn at the shoulder seam. His silk tie was skewed sideways, and a thin line of bright red blood trickled from a split lip where his face had collided with the edge of the microphone stand. He looked out at the sea of wealthy donors, his chest heaving, desperately searching the crowd for a friendly face. "Help me," he pleaded, making direct eye contact with the star NFL quarterback he had represented for 3 years. "Tell them who I am. Tell them I'm good for the money. Tell them this is a huge mistake." The massive athlete simply stared at him with pure disgust, slowly shaking his head. He turned his back on Derek and signaled his private security team to escort him toward the exit. Derek was completely radioactive. His social capital had evaporated in less than 3 minutes. Nobody was coming to save him. While Derek was being read his Miranda rights on the main stage, a secondary scene of absolute spectacular humiliation was unfolding at the back of the ballroom. Keisha had almost made it to the velvet-draped service corridor. She had kicked off her expensive designer heels to run faster and was carrying the hem of her cheap evening gown, fully convinced she had slipped away unnoticed in the chaos. But as she reached her hand out to grab the brass handle of the heavy exit door, two female IRS agents stepped out from the shadows of the hallway, entirely blocking her path. Keisha, you are also under federal arrest for accessory to corporate wire fraud, one of the agents stated coldly, pulling a pair of handcuffs from her tactical belt. Keisha let out a blood-curdling shriek that echoed over the shouting crowd. The tough, aggressive persona she had weaponized against me in my corporate office just 24 hours ago completely evaporated. She dropped her designer clutch, spilling her makeup and credit cards across the carpet, and fell to her knees. She thrashed wildly, swinging her arms as the agents moved in to secure her. "No, I did not do anything!" Keisha screamed, thick black mascara streaming down her face in ugly streaks. "It was my brother. Derek made me do it. I just wanted to run a boutique. I am a single mother. You cannot put me in jail. I do not know anything about a syndicate." She fought so aggressively, kicking and scratching, that the federal agents had to force her stomach first onto the ornate hotel carpet. One agent pressed a knee firmly into her lower back to finally secure the steel cuffs around her wrists. The remaining high society guests watched in horrified fascination as the woman who loved to brag about her exclusive connections and affluent lifestyle was dragged across the ballroom floor like a common thief, sobbing hysterically and screaming for her mother to save her. Estelle witnessed both of her children being handcuffed, humiliated, and dismantled within the span of 5 minutes. Her entire worldview, built entirely on the false superiority of her golden son and the manipulative entitlement of her daughter, collapsed into absolute dust. She pushed herself up from the VIP table, her legs trembling so violently she had to grip the edge of the tablecloth to keep from falling. She looked at Derek being marched down the stage stairs by the federal agents, then she turned slowly to look at me. I was still standing perfectly still in the center aisle. The red silk of my dress was completely unwrinkled. My posture was flawless. My expression was completely, terrifyingly impassive. I was watching the execution of my enemies, and I felt absolutely nothing but the pure, unadulterated satisfaction of a balanced ledger. Estelle stumbled toward me, pushing past overturned chairs and shattered champagne glasses. The haughty, demanding Southern matriarch was completely gone, replaced by a broken, terrified old woman whose legacy had just been publicly incinerated. She reached out and grabbed my bare arm with her cold, trembling hands. "Vanessa, please!" She begged, her voice a ragged, breathless wheeze. "You have to stop this. You have the power to stop this. Tell the agents it is a massive misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized those offshore transfers for his business. He is your husband. He is the father of your child. You cannot let them take him away. They will put him in a federal penitentiary. My boy will not survive in a place like that. You have to save our family." I looked down at her hands, gripping my arm. I did not pull away immediately. I wanted her to feel the absolute freezing coldness radiating from my skin. I wanted her to realize that the deep well of my forgiveness and financial grace had permanently dried up. "Estelle," I said softly, ensuring my voice carried only to her ears amid the chaotic noise of the raid. "Do you remember what you told me in my office yesterday morning? You looked me in the eye and told me that a strong black woman holds her family together. You told me I was supposed to ignore his disrespect fund, his failures, and accept his infidelity to protect the public image of his household." Estelle nodded frantically, fresh tears spilling over her deeply wrinkled cheeks. "Yes, yes, we have to protect each other from the outside world," she sobbed desperately, trying to use the cultural guilt trip one last time. I slowly peeled her cold, shaking fingers off my arm, dropping her hands back to her sides as if they were infected. "You are wrong, Estelle," I whispered, staring directly into her terrified eyes. "A strong woman cuts out the rot to save herself." You spent your entire life coddling a criminal. You taught him that he was entitled to the sweat off my back. You raised a parasite who actively tried to feed me to the federal government just to pay off his gambling debts. I am not his savior. I am his executioner. Now watch him squirm. Estelle let out a gut-wrenching wail, a sound of pure agonizing defeat. She collapsed to her knees right there in the center aisle, burying her face in her hands. She wept uncontrollably on the floor as the federal agents marched Derek directly past us. He did not look at me. He kept his head bowed, staring at the carpet. The absolute shame finally crushing the last remaining fragments of his fake pride. The arrogant man who had demanded I wear this red dress to make him look good was now doing a public perp walk in front of the entire Atlanta press corps. The ballroom was emptying rapidly as the wealthy guests fled the crime scene, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles outside illuminated the massive glass windows of the hotel lobby. And then a small, terrified voice pierced through the ambient chaos. "Mommy." I turned around. Chloe was standing alone by the abandoned VIP table. She was trembling from head to toe, her eyes wide with absolute unfiltered horror. The protective, spoiled bubble of extreme entitlement that her father had carefully built around her was completely shattered. She had just watched her arrogant father slammed onto a wooden podium and dragged away in handcuffs. She had watched her cruel aunt arrested on the floor. She had watched her commanding grandmother collapse in absolute despair. She finally realized who held the actual power in her life. Chloe ran toward me, tears streaming rapidly down her face, her expensive designer dress practically swallowing her small, shaking frame. She threw her arms tightly around my waist, burying her face into the side of my dress, crying hysterically. "Mommy, make them stop!" she sobbed, her voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated panic. "I am sorry. I am so sorry about the ticket at the airport. I will never do it again. I do not want to be here anymore. I want to go home." I looked down at the top of Chloe's head. Her tears were rapidly soaking through the expensive red silk of my dress. A week ago, my immediate maternal instinct would have been to drop to my knees, wrap my arms tightly around her shaking shoulders, and promise her that everything was going to be all right. I would have smoothed her hair, wiped away her tears, and shielded her from the brutal consequences of her father's actions. I would have paid off the debts, bought a new mansion, and desperately tried to buy back her affection with another $5,000 dog or a luxury vacation. I had spent her entire 12 years of life cushioning every fall and absorbing every insult. But that version of Vanessa died at the Delta check encounter. I was no longer the human shield for this family. I was the consequence. I did not hug her back. I did not stroke her hair or offer a single word of empty comfort. Instead, I raised my hands, placed them firmly on her shoulders, and pushed her back just enough to break the embrace and force her to look me directly in the eye. "We do not have a home anymore, Chloe," I said. My voice was completely steady, entirely devoid of the soft, coddling warmth she was desperately seeking. It was the voice of a chief executive officer terminating a toxic employee. Chloe gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes darted around the chaotic ballroom, watching the federal agents confiscate documents and interview terrified guests. "But my house," she stammered, her lower lip trembling violently. "My room. Where are we going to sleep tonight?" I stared at the daughter who had looked at me with pure disgust and called me an ATM machine. "Because of the lies you told on the internet, I explained, enunciating every single word, so it would permanently brand itself into her memory. Because you sat on a hardwood floor and cried to millions of strangers, claiming I stole your college fund and abused you. You chose to be a weapon for a man who was actively trying to send me to federal prison. You thought you were so incredibly smart, mocking me at the airport, demanding I stay behind like the hired help? Well, you are about to learn exactly how the real world works when you bite the hand that feeds you." Chloe began to shake harder, shaking her head in frantic denial. "But I was just doing what Dad told me to do," she pleaded, the spoiled entitlement finally cracking under the immense pressure of reality. "He said if I made the video and cried, you would get scared and bring my gaming computer back. He promised we were still going to Monaco. He promised I would get whatever I wanted. Your father is a criminal." "Chloe, I fired back, my tone absolute and unforgiving. He is going to a federal penitentiary for a very long time. He does not have a dime to his name. There is no Monaco. There is no gaming computer. And there is absolutely no more disrespecting me under my own roof. I reached out and plucked the designer smartphone from her trembling hand. She instinctively tried to pull it back, a final reflexive spasm of defiance, but my grip was like iron. I slid the phone into my clutch. "You are not going to need this where you are going," I told her. Before Chloe could even process the confiscation of her phone, a tall, impeccably dressed black woman stepped out from the shadows near the ballroom exit and approached us. She was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal business suit, her hair pulled back into a severe, elegant bun. She radiated an aura of absolute, uncompromising discipline. There was no warmth in her expression, only the sharp, calculating assessment of a seasoned educator who had broken the spirits of 1,000 entitled teenagers before. "Chloe," I said, not taking my eyes off my daughter. "This is Dr. Evelyn Sterling. She is the head mistress of the Oak Ridge Academy in upstate New York. It is a highly secure, extremely disciplined boarding school that specializes in behavioral correction." Chloe's eyes widened in sheer panic. She looked at Dr. Sterling, then back at me, stepping backward as if she had just been slapped. "Boarding school," she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly over the ambient noise of the federal raid. "No, you cannot send me away. I will not go. I will run away. I will call the police." "You do not have a phone, Chloe," I reminded her coldly. "And there is nowhere to run. At Oak Ridge there are no designer clothes. You will wear a uniform. There is no internet access. You will be waking up at 5:30 every morning to complete mandatory chores before your academic classes begin. You are going to learn what actual hard work looks like. You are going to learn how to respect the authority of the women around you, even if it takes until your 18th birthday." Dr. Sterling stepped forward. Her voice was deep, resonant, and left absolutely zero room for negotiation. "It is time to go, Chloe. My driver is waiting outside to take us directly to the airport. We have a late flight to catch." Chloe burst into a fresh wave of hysterical tears. She lunged forward, trying to grab my hand, begging and pleading for a second chance. "Mommy, please," she sobbed, completely abandoning the arrogant teenager persona. "I will be good. I will walk the dog. I will do the dishes. Please do not send me away with a stranger. I want to stay with you." I looked at her, feeling the dull ache of a mother's grief, buried deep beneath layers of impenetrable ice. I had to do this. If I kept her with me, she would forever view me as the villain who put her beloved father in jail. She needed a complete systemic reset, far away from the toxic, superficial Atlanta society that had poisoned her mind. "Dr. Sterling is not a stranger," I said quietly. "She is the only person who can fix the damage your father caused. Go with her, now." I gave Dr. Sterling a firm nod. The headmistress firmly grasped Chloe by the upper arm. It was not an abusive grip, but it was an inescapable one. Chloe continued to cry, looking back over her shoulder at me as Dr. Sterling marched her purposefully toward the side exit of the ballroom. I watched my daughter disappear through the double doors. I did not wave goodbye. I did not shed a single tear. I simply turned around to face the main stage, ready to close the final chapter of this miserable story. The federal agents were currently marching Derek down the center aisle of the ballroom. They were flanked by local police officers who had arrived to help secure the massive crime scene. Derek was doing the ultimate perp walk. His hands were cuffed tightly behind his back. His custom tuxedo ruined his face, pale and slick with panicked sweat. The remaining journalists in the room were snapping hundreds of photos documenting the spectacular fall of elite athletics management. As the agents dragged him past the VIP tables, Derek saw me standing there. He stopped fighting the agents for a brief second and planted his feet into the carpet, forcing them to halt. "Vanessa," he screamed. His voice was raw, shredded from yelling, echoing loudly through the cavernous space. "Vanessa, look at me. You cannot do this to me. I am your husband. I am the father of your child. Tell them to stop. Tell them it was a corporate mistake." I was standing less than 10 feet away from him. I did not turn my head. I kept my eyes focused perfectly forward, staring blankly at the empty stage where his fake empire had just been incinerated. I refused to give him the satisfaction of a final gaze. I refused to let him see any emotion on my face. To me, he was already a ghost. "Look at me!" he roared, thrashing wildly against the federal agents trying to break free just to force me to acknowledge his existence. "You crazy, vindictive woman. Look at me. Let us go, buddy!" One of the agents growled, shoving Derek hard in the center of his back, forcing him to stumble forward toward the grand exit doors. He continued to scream my name, hurling vicious obscenities over his shoulder until the heavy wooden doors finally swung shut behind him, cutting off his pathetic voice forever. Valerie walked over to me. She was holding a digital tablet and a thick stack of evidence intake forms. The professional distance between us was still firmly in place, but I could see a faint glimmer of respect in her eyes. "We have secured the offshore ledgers from the AV booth," Valerie stated efficiently, "and my team is currently executing a search warrant on his corporate offices downtown. But we need to catalog any physical assets he purchased with the syndicate's money during the last 3 years. Do you know of any high-value items he acquired while running the Ponzi scheme?" I looked down at my left hand. Resting on my ring finger was a massive, flawless 5-carat diamond ring. Derek had purchased it for our 10th wedding anniversary 2 years ago. At the time, I thought it was a beautiful gesture of renewed commitment. He had made a grand public speech about how much he valued me. Now, knowing the timeline Julian had uncovered in the forensic audit, I knew exactly how he had paid for it. He had bought my anniversary ring using the sign-on bonus of a 22-year-old rookie linebacker money that was supposed to be routed to the offshore gambling syndicate. I reached over with my right hand and grabbed the heavy diamond. I slid it off my finger. The platinum band felt suddenly freezing cold against my skin. It felt like shedding a shackle. I held the ring out to Valerie. "He bought this 2 years ago," I said, dropping the massive diamond directly into her open palm. "The receipt is in the corporate files. It is syndicate money. Take it as evidence." Valerie looked at the ring, then back up at me. She pulled a small plastic evidence bag from her tactical vest and dropped the ring inside, sealing it shut with a sharp zip. "Are you going to be okay, Vanessa?" she asked, dropping the federal agent persona for just a fraction of a second to check on her old friend. I looked at my bare left hand. The skin where the ring used to sit was slightly paler than the rest of my finger, a faint lingering ghost of a 12-year mistake. But the weight was gone. The heavy, suffocating pressure of carrying a fraudulent man through life had been completely lifted. I looked back at Valerie and offered her a small, genuine smile, for the first time in 12 years. "I am going to be perfect." Exactly 1 month after the federal raid, the pristine illusion of Atlanta's most prominent sports management family had been reduced to a pile of federal indictments and seized assets. The swiftness of the justice system when motivated by a meticulously documented $5 million fraud case was a beautiful thing to witness. I did not attend any of the preliminary court hearings. I did not need to. My legal team and the forensic accountants provided me with daily, highly detailed updates that read like the concluding chapters of a perfectly executed hostile takeover. Derek had his bail hearing 2 weeks after his spectacular arrest at the charity gala. He had walked into the federal courtroom wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, his wrists and ankles shackled in heavy iron chains. He was completely stripped of his custom Tom Ford suits, his expensive watches, and his manufactured charisma. According to the court transcripts, his defense attorney had pleaded with the judge to grant him house arrest, arguing that Derek was a devoted father and a pillar of the local community. But Valerie and the federal prosecutors immediately introduced the decrypted offshore ledgers and the intercepted communications with the illegal sports betting syndicate. They proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Derek had access to international criminal networks and was a massive flight risk. The judge did not hesitate. Bail was categorically denied. Derek was remanded back to the maximum security federal detention center in downtown Atlanta to await his criminal trial. I was told he broke down and sobbed openly in the courtroom when the judge banged the gavel. He realized that the luxurious life he had stolen was permanently over. He tried to call me from the prison phone system every single day for the first week, desperate to manipulate me into funding his legal defense. I simply instructed my telecommunications provider to permanently block all incoming calls originating from the federal penitentiary. He was entirely isolated, trapped in a concrete cell, forced to sit in silence and reflect on the exact moment he decided to treat his wife like an expendable asset. His sister Keisha faced a similarly catastrophic downfall. The morning after the gala agents from the Internal Revenue Service arrived at her boutique fashion store, they did not just audit her books. They completely seized the property, confiscating all her inventory and freezing her business accounts to recover the stolen corporate funds she had laundered to pay for Derek's mistress. 3 days later, the property management company in Buckhead officially evicted her from the luxury condo. She was hit with a barrage of federal accessory charges for wire fraud and conspiracy. Facing the terrifying prospect of a decade in federal prison, Keisha did exactly what cowards always do when cornered. She turned on her own blood. She accepted a plea deal from the prosecutors, agreeing to testify fully against Derek in exchange for a reduced sentence. The unbreakable bond of the proud black family she had screamed about in my office had evaporated the second her own freedom was threatened. The financial devastation eventually trickled all the way up to the matriarch. Estelle, who had spent her entire life enabling Derek's toxic behavior and looking down her nose at my corporate career, was suddenly forced to face the brutal reality of capitalism. To keep Keisha out of a maximum security prison and to hire a mid-level defense attorney for her golden son, Estelle had to completely liquidate her life. She went to the banks to take out a second mortgage on her beautiful historic home in the suburbs, only to discover that her credit had been secretly ruined by Derek years ago. With no other options, she was forced to sell the house to a corporate cash buyer at a massive loss. I drove past her old neighborhood once purely out of curiosity on the day she was moving out. I parked my car down the street and watched as the haughty, demanding woman directed a team of cheap movers to load her antique furniture into a rented box truck. She was moving into a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, taking Keisha with her. They had become social pariahs. The affluent friends they used to entertain had completely abandoned them, terrified of being associated with a federal money laundering investigation. Estelle had built her entire identity on the illusion of superiority and control. Now she had nothing left but an empty bank account and the crushing shame of a ruined legacy. As for Chloe, the transition was painful, but it was absolutely necessary. Dr. Sterling, the headmistress of the Oak Ridge Academy, sent me weekly progress reports. The first 2 weeks were a nightmare of rebellion. Chloe had tried to manipulate the staff, throwing massive tantrums, refusing to wear her uniform, and demanding to speak to her father. But Dr. Sterling was immovable. She did not negotiate with teenagers. Chloe was stripped of her privileges, assigned mandatory kitchen chores, and forced to adhere to a rigid, disciplined schedule. By the third week, the letters Chloe was required to write home began to change in tone. The arrogant demands for her gaming computer and designer clothes slowly faded. They were replaced by expressions of genuine exhaustion and, for the first time in her life, a tiny glimmer of accountability. In her last letter, she admitted that she had helped scrub the academy dining hall floors for 3 hours, and she finally understood why I was always so tired when I came home from work. It would take years of intense therapy and strict boundaries to completely undo the psychological damage Derek had inflicted upon her, but she was finally off the path of destruction. She was learning how to be a functioning human being instead of a spoiled accessory. With the parasites completely removed from my ecosystem, my own life experienced a profound and explosive rebirth. My corporate firm secured 3 massive new contracts within a week of the federal raid. The investors and board members who had initially panicked over the viral live stream were suddenly in awe of the absolute surgical precision with which I had neutralized the threat. I was no longer viewed as a liability. I was viewed as a titan of risk management. I did not move my new furniture back into the massive echoing mansion in the suburbs. That house belonged to a ghost story I no longer wished to tell. Instead, I instructed my real estate broker to sell the property as is. I purchased a sleek, ultra-modern penthouse apartment in the heart of downtown Atlanta, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling city skyline. It was clean, quiet, and completely mine. There were no fake Italian leather sofas. There were no dogs barking for attention. There were no demanding voices telling me what I owed them. There was only the sweet, uninterrupted sound of absolute peace. Exactly 30 days after the most chaotic morning of my life, I found myself standing in the international terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. I walked into the Delta One VIP check-in lounge, approaching the exact same polished marble counter where my marriage had officially ended. The ticketing agent looked up, offering a warm professional smile. I handed her my passport. There was no whining 12-year-old standing next to me. There was no arrogant husband hiding behind dark sunglasses. There was just me, carrying a sleek designer weekender bag dressed in a perfectly tailored white silk suit that felt like armor. I took my boarding pass and walked straight into the exclusive departure lounge. The atmosphere was calm, filled with the soft clinking of crystal glasses and the low murmur of wealthy travelers. I found a quiet, secluded corner with a plush leather armchair, ordered a glass of chilled sparkling water, and opened my laptop. I had a few final corporate emails to approve before I disconnected for 2 weeks. As I typed my final signature on a lucrative merger document, a shadow fell across my table. "All work and no play," a deep, smooth voice asked from across the aisle. I looked up from my screen. Standing a few feet away was a strikingly handsome man wearing a bespoke navy suit. He had an athletic build, kind eyes, and a confident, genuine smile that lacked any of the manufactured arrogance I was so used to seeing. He held a glass of bourbon in his hand, gesturing slightly toward my laptop with an expression of polite curiosity. I looked at the stranger, then I looked down at my screen. The final email had been sent. The corporate accounts were secure. The federal lawsuits were locked in. The divorce papers had been finalized and signed by a judge in absentia. My ledger was perfectly balanced. I reached out and slowly closed the laptop, the soft click of the metal casing sounding incredibly satisfying. I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out my thick premium cardstock boarding pass, placing it face up on the glass table between us. The bold black letters spelling out Monaco were clearly visible. "Actually, I am just reviewing my final victory," I replied, offering him a brilliant, completely unburdened smile. "The play starts when I land." The handsome stranger chuckled, his eyes lighting up with genuine intrigue. He raised his glass of bourbon in a silent, respectful toast to my journey before turning to head toward his own departure gate. I picked up my boarding pass and my weekender bag, walking toward the boarding doors for the transatlantic flight. The attendant scanned my ticket and smiled warmly, welcoming me to the first-class cabin. I stepped onto the plane and found my private suite sinking into the plush leather seat. A flight attendant immediately appeared, offering me a crystal flute of vintage champagne. I took the glass, feeling the cool condensation against my fingertips. I looked out the window as the heavy cabin doors were sealed shut, locking out the noise of the city, the chaos of my past, and the memories of the people who had tried to bury me. They say family is everything, but when your family treats you like a bank, you have to foreclose on them. I did not just cancel a trip, I canceled their free ride. I raised the crystal flute to my lips, took a long, satisfying sip of the champagne, and let the engines carry me away. The most profound lesson from Vanessa's journey is that biological ties or marriage certificates do not automatically earn someone the right to exploit your hard work. True family is built on mutual respect, not financial parasitism. For too long, societal expectations have demanded that successful women shrink themselves to protect the fragile egos of the men around them, absorbing their failures just to keep the peace. But peace bought with your own subjugation is simply a hostage situation. Real empowerment requires establishing ironclad boundaries. Sometimes the absolute best thing you can do for yourself is to ruthlessly cut the rot. If you have ever had to establish ironclad boundaries to protect your peace and your empire, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of unapologetic empowerment, and let me know in the comments how you finally took your power back.